Martha Collins didn't even glance at the two little girls shivering in the rain before she turned to the sheriff and said flatly, like she was talking about livestock, "They're mine. Load them up." Lily flinched so hard she knocked into Emma, and Emma grabbed her sister's arm and pressed her face into Mason Hawk's side without making a sound. Not crying, not begging, just holding on the way children hold on when they've already learned that crying doesn't help. Mason didn't move. He stood between the woman and the girls with his boots planted in the mud and his hands open at his sides, and he said, very quietly, "You're not taking them anywhere." Martha smiled. That was the worst part. She actually smiled. "Sheriff," she said, "remove him. If this story stopped your scroll, stay with us. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next, and when we get to the end of this one, drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all started. Listen, the storm came in fast, the way Arizona storms always did. No warning, no mercy, just a wall of black cloud rolling in from the west like something had gone wrong with the sky itself. Ruby Bennett was in the barn when she felt the first shift in the air, that particular stillness before a bad one, where even the horses go quiet. She had a lantern in one hand and a bucket of oats in the other, and she stood there for a moment just listening. Then the wind hit the barn door hard enough to rattle the hinges, and she set the bucket down and started moving. She'd learned 2 years ago not to hesitate when the weather turned, the same way she'd learned 100 other things after Thomas walked out and left her with a failing ranch, $300 of debt she didn't know about, and a name in town that people said with a slight pause before it, the way they paused before saying something they weren't sure was entirely respectable. A woman alone, running land, at 26. Ruby Bennett. Pause. The one out on the Cutter Road property. She'd gotten used to the pause. She pulled the barn door shut and threw the crossbar, checked the latch on the chicken coop, dragged an extra tarp over the woodpile she'd split that morning. The sky had gone from gray to green-gray to something that didn't have a color name, and the first real drops of rain hit the dust like thrown stones. By the time she got back to the cabin, she was soaked through. She lit the stove, changed into dry clothes, and told herself she'd be in bed by 8. She had fence posts to dig come morning, and the ground would be soft after the rain, and she needed to be up before first light to make it worth anything. She was pulling her hair back when she heard something at the door. Not a knock exactly, more like a hesitation, a sound that almost wasn't a sound, the shuffling of feet on the porch boards, stopping, going quiet. Ruby put down the strip of leather she'd been tying her hair with and picked up the rifle from its place beside the door. She didn't make noise about it. She just did it. "Who's there?" she said, not loud. Nothing for a beat. Then a man's voice, careful and low. "I'm not here to cause trouble, ma'am. I need to ask you something." She didn't open the door. "Ask it from there." A pause. Rain hammering the roof hard enough to make it difficult to hear. She pressed closer to the door. "I have 2 girls," the man said. "Children. They're cold and they've been in this rain for 2 hours and He stopped. Started again. "I'm asking you to let them inside, just the girls. I'll stay outside. I don't need anything." Ruby stood very still. "What girls?" she said. "Sisters. 7 and 9. They're on the mule right now, and the little one's shaking bad, and I can't—" Another pause, longer this time. "Please." That word. The way he said it, not like a man performing desperation, like a man who had run out of other options and knew it. Ruby cracked the door open 2 inches, keeping the rifle against her leg where it wasn't obvious but wasn't hidden either. The man on the porch was Apache, maybe 30, maybe older, hard to tell in the dark and the rain. He was soaked to the skin, shirt plastered flat against him. He had no coat. He was standing back from the door, not crowding it, not moving toward it, and his arms were down at his sides in the deliberate way of someone who wants to look as unthreatening as possible. Behind him, at the edge of the porch light, she could just make out a mule standing patient in the downpour, and on its back 2 small shapes huddled together under a piece of canvas that wasn't doing much. "You said you'd stay outside," Ruby said. "Yes, ma'am." "In this?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for another second. He met her eyes, and then looked away, which she noticed. Like he understood what it meant for a woman alone to open a door at night, and he didn't want to make it harder than it already was. Ruby opened the door. Get the girls, she said. He turned immediately and went to the mule, and she watched him lift the smaller child down first, the way you'd lift something fragile, careful with his hands, saying something quiet to her that Ruby couldn't hear over the rain. The child didn't flinch from him. That was the first thing Ruby registered. The little one just let herself be carried, head dropping to his shoulder for a moment before he set her down on the porch and turned back for the older one. "Come on, Emma," he said, and his voice was different when he talked to the girls. Still quiet, but something else in it. The older girl climbed down on her own. She had dark circles under her eyes and a cut on her chin, dried and scabbed, and she didn't look at Ruby when she came up the steps. She was looking at the little one, checking her the way an older sibling checks, making sure. The man, he hadn't given his name yet, set the smaller girl's feet on the porch and straightened up. "Thank you," he said to Ruby. "I'll be right out here if—" "What's your name?" Ruby said. He looked at her. "Mason Hawk." "Ruby Bennett." She wasn't sure why she said it. Habit, maybe. "Get in here, both of you, all three. I'm not leaving anyone in that." He shook his head. "The girls are all that matters." "Mason." She said the name like she was testing it. "I've got a dry floor and a stove and soup on, and if you stay out there, you're going to be sick by morning, and that helps nobody. Get in the house." He looked at the girls. Something passed across his face. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. "All right," he said. She stepped back and let them in. The cabin was not large. One main room with the stove and the table, and the two chairs Ruby had kept after Thomas took the better ones. A sleeping area through a half-wall partition, a shelf of canned goods, a row of hooks for coats, a rag rug on the floor that had seen better years. The little one, Lily, Ruby learned later, went immediately to stand as close to the stove as Ruby would allow. Emma stood beside her, still doing that checking thing with her eyes. They didn't touch anything, didn't ask for anything, just stood there dripping on the rug and watching Ruby with a careful measuring stillness that was too old for 9 years. Mason stayed near the door. He hadn't taken his boots off. He hadn't moved toward the stove or the chairs or anything else in the room. "Sit down," Ruby said, not unkindly. "I'm all right. You're standing in a puddle." He looked down at the water pooling from his clothes. A small, pained expression crossed his face, something between embarrassment and resignation. He moved to the bench by the door and sat on the edge of it, the furthest point in the room from everything else. Ruby got the soup going properly. It had been sitting low on the heat, and found the bread she'd made 2 days ago, still good. She cut it and put it on the table. Got out the 2 bowls she used most, and then remembered there were 4 of them, and got the other 2 down from the high shelf, the ones she rarely touched anymore. "Emma," she said, "can you get her to come to the table?" Emma put her hand on Lily's arm and said something low, and Lily allowed herself to be moved to the table, still eyeing the stove like leaving it was a personal loss. They sat. Ruby put soup in front of them. They didn't start eating. "Go ahead," Ruby said. Emma looked at Mason. Mason nodded once. They picked up their spoons. Ruby watched them eat, and she made herself stop watching because it was something you didn't stare at. The carefulness of it. The way Emma broke her bread into pieces and put some of it next to Lily's bowl without being asked. The way Lily ate slowly despite clearly being hungry, like she'd learned not to rush through things because rushing meant it was over sooner. She looked at Mason instead. He was eating the soup she'd put in front of him, but every few seconds his eyes went to the girls. Quick checks. The way a parent looks at a child in a crowd. That reflexive, constant accounting. "They're not yours," Ruby said. Not accusing, just asking. Mason looked at her. "No. But you've been with them how long?" He thought about it. 6 weeks, near enough. "Where are you headed?" "Tucson," he said. "I've got work lined up there, honest work." He said that last part deliberately, like he knew what assumptions people made. "Ranch hand job. The man wrote me a letter in Flagstaff. I was going to—" He stopped. "We were going to take the stage, but we ran short on money and the weather." "Where are their people?" Ruby said. Silence. Emma had gone still, soup spoon part way to her mouth. Mason set down his bread. Their father died 8 months ago. Their mother 6 weeks after that. There's an aunt, somewhere. Somewhere. "We haven't been able to find her," he said. "The aunt." We've been trying. There was something in the way he said it. Not quite the truth, Ruby thought, not quite a lie either, a shape around something he didn't want to say in front of the children. She didn't push it. You can sleep here tonight, she said. All of you. I've got blankets. Mason started to say something. She held up her hand. The storm's not letting up till morning. I've got a floor. It's no trouble. She looked at the girls. Lily had her eyes half closed, still holding her spoon. That one's going to be asleep in 10 minutes. He looked at Lily, too. His expression did something complicated. Thank you, he said. And this time he meant it differently. Not the polite kind of thank you, not the performing gratitude kind. The kind that comes out when someone has nothing left to give in return and they know it. Ruby poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down. Lily was asleep in 8 minutes, not 10. Ruby had put her in the bed in the partition, her own bed, without thinking much about it. Emma sat on the edge, watching her sister sleep, and only moved to the pallet on the floor when she was sure the little one was settled. That left Ruby and Mason at the table. The storm went at the roof like it had a complaint. The stove ticked. Outside, the mule, Ruby had put it in the barn at some point. She'd gone out in the rain and done it without really deciding to, was presumably dry and eating what was left of her hay. The aunt, Ruby said. Mason looked up from the table. You know where she is, Ruby said, or you know something about her that you didn't want to say in front of the girls. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, what makes you say that? You said we haven't been able to find her when the girl was listening. The way you said it was different from how you'd said everything else. Careful. He looked at her across the table. She couldn't read his expression exactly. Something like reassessment. The aunt's name is Martha Collins, he said, finally. She's not what the girls think she is. He paused. She contacted me 3 months ago when I was still in Flagstaff. Said she'd heard I knew where the girls were and she wanted them returned to family. She seemed, he chose his words, she seemed right, what an aunt should be. I wrote back, told her I'd bring them. But, Ruby said, but I ran into a man in Prescott who knew her, and what he told me, he stopped, looked at the partition where the girls were sleeping, lowered his voice. She's been selling children, Miss Bennett, has been for years. Takes in orphans who don't have anyone looking out for them, and she's got a network of men. I don't know all of it, I only know what I was told. Men who pay her, not to adopt, not to give them homes. He stopped. I took the girls, and I ran. Ruby sat very still. You could have gone to a lawman, she said. Who do you think told me to run, he said. The sheriff in Prescott said he couldn't touch her without proof, and she had people in his office, and if I walked in with the girls, someone would tip her off before I got to a cell. Said my best chance was distance. So you were taking them to Tucson? To the ranch job. Private land, good man. Figured if I could get them far enough and get them settled, find someone who'd take them in proper... He exhaled. I know how it sounds. It sounds like a man doing something very stupid for the right reasons, Ruby said. He almost smiled. It was brief and tired, and then it was gone. That's about the most accurate thing anyone said to me in 6 weeks. Ruby got up and took the coffee off the stove and refilled both their cups without asking. She sat back down. How'd you end up with them in the first place, she said, before all this? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, their father was a good man. I knew him from freighting work years back. He helped me once when... It doesn't matter. He helped me when I needed it, and I never forgot it. When he died, I went to pay my respects. Found the girls had nobody. Emma was trying to look after Lily herself. He paused. She was 9 years old and she was cooking on a stove she could barely reach and keeping the door locked at night because she didn't know what else to do. Ruby set down her cup. So, he said, I stayed. Outside, the rain hammered. A branch hit the side of the cabin and both of them looked at the wall. I'm not going to turn you in, Ruby said, in case that's what you're sitting there thinking. He looked at her. I wasn't, actually. You were. Another almost smile. Maybe a little. Sleep, Ruby said. I'll take the chair. You take the floor by the stove. The girls will be all right. He started to argue. She shook her head. Mason, I've been running this place alone for 2 years. I know how to stay up when I need to and sleep when I don't. Tonight I don't need to." She looked at him directly. "You look like you haven't slept properly in a week." "Longer than that," he admitted, quietly. "Then sleep," she said. She gave him blankets, and he made a pallet near the stove, and she watched him lie down with his back to the room, facing the partition where the girls were. Even lying down, even clearly exhausted, there was something vigilant in the way he positioned himself, like his body hadn't gotten the message that it was allowed to stop watching. Ruby sat in the chair with her coffee and listened to the storm. She thought about Thomas. She thought about the way she'd trusted him. Not blindly. She hadn't been blind. She'd just been wrong in the particular way you were wrong when you believe someone's words instead of their pattern. Thomas had a pattern. She'd just not looked at it until too late. Mason Hawk had a pattern too. She'd been watching it all evening. He didn't take. That was the thing. He'd come to her door in a storm with 2 cold children, and he'd asked for nothing for himself. Not food, not shelter, not even a kind word. Every time she'd offered something, he'd tried to redirect it to the girls. The soup, the blankets, the floor. He'd taken the minimum he couldn't refuse without causing trouble for the children, and that was all. She'd known men who performed generosity. Thomas had been very good at performing generosity. Big gestures, loud about them, made sure people saw. What he couldn't do was the quiet kind, the kind that happened when nobody was looking, the kind where you stayed outside in a cold rain because you didn't want to make a woman uncomfortable. Ruby finished her coffee and set the cup on the table and looked at the man sleeping on her floor and thought, "This is either the most genuinely decent person I've met in 2 years, or he is very good at appearing to be one." She fell asleep in the chair before she could decide which. She woke to the sound of the stove being tended. Gray morning light coming through the window. Storm gone, replaced by the particular silence that follows bad weather. A washed-out stillness, everything rinsed clean. Mason was crouched by the stove with a piece of wood, doing it quietly. He'd already remade his pallet and set the blankets folded. He looked up when she moved. "Sorry," he said, trying not to wake anyone. "You didn't." Ruby stood up, working a kink out of her neck. "How long have you been up?" "Hour, maybe." She looked toward the partition. "Girls still sleeping?" "Yes." "Good." She moved to the window. The yard looked like a creek had run through it. Mud and standing water and 2 fence posts she could see from here that were tilted now and would need resetting. She'd known they were soft before the storm. She'd meant to do them last week. She turned around and found Mason looking at the same thing through the window. "I can fix those," he said. "You don't—" "I know I don't." He looked at her steadily. "I want to. You've given us a night and food, and I want to do something useful in return. If that's all right." She looked at him. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't overselling it, just standing there waiting to hear her answer. "Barn fence on the east side needs the whole rail replaced," she said. "While you're at it." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll take a look." "Posts are in the barn, far left. Tools on the east wall." He nodded and went out. Ruby made the coffee. She stood at the window while it came up and watched him cross the yard in the early light, picking his way through the standing water with his hands in his pockets. He stopped at the tilted fence posts first, crouched down, worked one of them with his hands to test it, moved to the next. She could see him thinking it through, solving it without consulting anyone. Behind her, small feet on the wooden floor. She turned. Lily was standing in the doorway of the partition, hair wild, squinting in the morning light with the particular expression of a child who hasn't finished being asleep. "Where's Mason?" she said. Not alarmed, just checking. "Outside," Ruby said. "Fixing the fence." Lily looked toward the window, then back at Ruby. She considered this. "Is there breakfast?" she said. "There's oatmeal if you want to earn it," Ruby said. Lily blinked. "What do I have to do?" "Stir the pot when I tell you and don't let it stick." Lily appeared to find this a reasonable arrangement. She came to the stove and stood next to Ruby and waited to be told what to do. But Emma appeared 20 minutes later, more alert than her sister, already scanning the room the way she'd done the night before. She relaxed when she saw Lily at the stove. "She's not a nuisance, is she?" Emma said to Ruby. "She's a decent stir," Ruby said. "Better than most." Lily stood up slightly straighter. Emma sat at the table and watched her sister in a way that managed to look like she wasn't watching. Ruby put oatmeal in front of her and she ate it, and Ruby noticed she cleaned the bowl completely, no waste, the way people ate who had gotten used to uncertainty about the next meal. They were halfway through breakfast when Mason came back in. He had mud on his knees and his hands, and he stopped at the door. "Fence posts are set. Rail on the east barn needs one more board, but I wanted to check what you had before I cut anything." "Boards are in the loft," Ruby said. "Second stack." He nodded. "There's a split board on the south side of the cabin, above the window. Weather gets in, it rains hard like last night. It'll let water into the wall." Ruby hadn't known about that board. "I can get it today if you've got spare lumber," he said. "I've got spare lumber," she said. He went back out. Lily watched the door close behind him. "He does that," Emma said, not looking up from her bowl. "He just fixes things, even when nobody asks him." Ruby looked at the door. "I noticed," she said. By mid-morning, he'd done the fence post, the barn rail, and the split board above the south window. He'd also, without being asked, cleared the drainage ditch along the east side of the yard that had backed up with debris in the storm and was still sending a slow stream of muddy water toward the cabin foundation. Ruby had meant to clear that ditch for 2 weeks. She brought him water at noon and found him at the ditch with a long-handled spade, working steadily. "You're not slowing down," she said. "Ditch needs clearing," he said, not breaking pace. "It's not your ditch." He looked up. Something in his eyes. "I'm not unkind. Steady. You let us in out of a storm when you didn't have to," he said. "I don't know how else to say thank you." "You said thank you last night." "I know." He went back to work. She stood there watching him for a moment. He wasn't showing off. He wasn't checking to see if she was watching. He'd have been doing the exact same thing if she hadn't come out here at all. She went back inside. She found Emma at the table with Lily's hair, carefully working through the tangles with a comb she'd apparently found somewhere. Lily was sitting very still, eyes on the window. "She tangles bad," Emma said, matter of fact. "I have to do it every day, or it gets impossible." "How long have you been doing her hair?" Ruby asked. "Mama got sick early," Emma said. Still matter of fact, the tone of a child who has processed grief the way adults process taxes, something that happened and had to be dealt with. "So, a while." Ruby sat down across from them and didn't say anything. Lily was watching the window where, if you leaned a little, you could see Mason at the ditch. "Is he going to stay?" Lily asked. "I don't know," Ruby said. "He never stays anywhere," Emma said. Comb working through a snag, careful. "He's always about to leave. Even when he's somewhere, he's already getting ready to go." Ruby thought about that. "Maybe," she said, "he's never found somewhere worth staying." Lily turned to look at her. 7 years old, big dark eyes, still had that look kids had before the world taught them to edit themselves. "Do you think he could stay here?" Lily said. Ruby looked at her, then at the window, then back. "I don't know," she said again. But it was a different kind of "I don't know." Emma, who was 9 and sharp as a new nail, heard the difference and didn't say anything, just kept combing. That afternoon, Ruby found Mason sitting on the porch step with a piece of broken harness he'd found in the barn, mending it with a needle and cord, not because she'd asked, but because it was broken and he'd seen it. She sat down on the step next to him, not close, just beside him, and for a while neither of them said anything. "You should know," he said eventually, "that I can't stay." "I know," Ruby said. "The job in Tucson. It's the best chance I've had at getting them settled proper." He worked the needle through the leather. "Good man, by all accounts. Big spread. If I can get established there—" "I understand," Ruby said. He nodded. The needle went through again. "You know anyone in Tucson?" he asked. "Contacts, people you trust." "One person," she said. "My father's old business partner, Hank Delaney. He runs a dry goods—" She stopped. Down the road, a flash of something, a carriage moving fast, coming from the direction of town. Mason had seen it too. He'd gone still the way an animal goes still, that particular quality of attention that was less relaxation and more the opposite of it. "You expecting anyone?" he said, quiet. "No," Ruby said. They watched the carriage come down the road. It was a good carriage, too good for a ranch road in this county, polished dark wood, a driver in a coat. It turned into Ruby's drive and came to a stop, and the door opened before the driver had fully set the brake. The woman who stepped out was perhaps 50, well-dressed in the way that managed to seem both understated and deliberate. She had iron gray hair put up precisely, and the face of someone who had learned a long time ago how to make pleasant expressions mean nothing at all. She looked at Ruby, she looked at Mason. She looked at Mason for a long moment, then she smiled. "Mr. Hawk," she said, "I've been looking for you." Mason stood up from the porch step. The piece of harness was still in his hands. "Miss Collins?" he said. The name hit Ruby like cold water. Martha Collins. The aunt. The woman he'd been running from. "And the girls," Martha said pleasantly, looking toward the cabin door. "Are they well?" "They're fine," Mason said. His voice was very careful, very flat. "Wonderful." She folded her hands in front of her, a gesture of perfect reasonableness. "Then we can sort this out quickly. I'm sure you'll agree it's past time the girls were with their family." "They are with their family," Mason said. Martha's smile didn't change at all. That was the thing about it. It just sat there, fixed, like it had been painted on. "I'm their aunt," she said, "their only living relation." "I know who you are," Mason said. A beat of silence. Martha's eyes moved to Ruby, that measuring look again. "And you are," she said. "Ruby Bennett," Ruby said. "This is my property." "Of course." Pleasant, perfectly pleasant. "I hope Mr. Hawk hasn't been any trouble. He tends to complicate things." "He's been a good deal of help," Ruby said. Something flickered behind Martha's eyes, brief and gone. "How lovely," she said. "Well, I won't take up more of your time. I simply need the children, and then I'll be out of your way." Ruby looked at Mason. Mason was looking at Martha the way you looked at a thing you couldn't afford to look away from. "The girls aren't going anywhere today," Ruby said. Martha turned to her slowly. "I beg your pardon," she said. "It's late afternoon," Ruby said, "and they've had a hard couple of days. Anyone can see that. If you'd like to come back in the morning and sit with them for a bit, let them get used to you, make sure they're comfortable. You're welcome to do that." The pleasant smile was still there, but something had shifted underneath it. "I am their family," Martha said. "I don't need permission. On my property," Ruby said. "I decide what happens." She met the woman's eyes and held them. "Come back tomorrow." A very long silence. "Very well," Martha said at last, smooth as river ice. "Tomorrow then." She got back in the carriage. The driver clicked to the horses. Ruby and Mason stood side by side on the porch and watched it go back down the road and turn toward town. Neither of them moved until it was out of sight. "She'll bring the sheriff," Mason said. "I know," Ruby said. "He'll have papers, legal standing. I don't have—" He stopped. "I don't have anything on paper. I've got nothing to show that says I have any right to keep them from her." "You have the girls themselves," Ruby said. He looked at her. "Children talk," Ruby said. "First thing tomorrow, before she gets back here with anyone." She stopped and put it together as she said it. "We find out what Lily and Emma know, what they saw, what they heard." She turned to face him. "Martha Collins wants us scrambling in the dark. Let's stop scrambling." Mason was quiet for a moment. "You don't know what you'd be getting into," he said, "if you do this. If she thinks you're against her." "I watched that woman step out of a carriage and look at two children she hadn't seen in months," Ruby said, "and the first thing she said was to you, not are they safe, not are they hungry. She didn't even ask their names." She looked at him. "I know what I'm getting into." The late afternoon light came sideways across the yard, picking out the fence posts Mason had set that morning, straight and solid in the reset ground. From inside the cabin, they could hear Lily saying something to Emma, and Emma's voice answering back, and then Lily laughing at something. That full, sudden laugh of a child who has forgotten. just for a moment, that there's anything to be afraid of. Mason turned his head toward the sound. Ruby watched his face, and she thought, there it is, right there. The thing that tells you everything about a person. Not what they say, not what they do when someone's watching, what their face does when a child laughs and they don't know anyone can see them. Come inside, she said. I'll make supper, and then we need to talk to the girls. Supper that night was quieter than the one before, but not in a bad way. The storm was gone, and the night was cool and dry, and the four of them sat around Ruby's table with plates of salt pork and fried cornbread, and for a while nobody said anything important. Lily ate with more appetite than the night before. Emma ate the same careful way she always did, but her shoulders were lower, less braced. Small things. Ruby noticed them. Mason noticed them too. She could tell by the way he stopped watching the girls quite so hard. Not that he stopped entirely, just that the frequency changed. Like a man who has been holding something heavy and found a place to set it down, just briefly, just to rest his arms. It was Ruby who brought it around. She waited until Lily had slowed down on her food, and Emma had gone quiet in the way that meant she was thinking. She put her fork down and folded her hands on the table and said simply, I want to ask you both something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is hard. Lily looked up. Emma already had her eyes on Ruby, steady. The woman who came today, Ruby said. Martha Collins, your aunt. She watched their faces. What do you know about her? The silence that followed was the kind that had a shape to it. Emma set down her fork very precisely, parallel to the edge of her plate. She's not really our aunt, Emma said. Ruby kept her voice level. What do you mean? I mean, she told people she was. She told our father she was our mother's cousin, and he believed her because he didn't know our mother's family well. They were from far away. Emma said it straight, no dramatics. But Mama never talked about her, not once. And when Martha started coming around after Mama got sick, Emma paused, chose her words. She always wanted to know about the property, the deed, who it would go to. Your father's land, Ruby said. There wasn't much, small plot, but she kept asking. Emma looked at Lily. Something passed between them. Tell her, Emma said. Lily was looking at the table. She picked up her spoon and put it down. I heard her, Lily said, small voice. In the kitchen, after Papa's funeral, she was talking to a man I didn't know, and I was in the hall and she didn't see me. She stopped. Take your time, Ruby said. She said the girls would be worth more than the land. Lily said it flat, like she was repeating something she'd memorized because she'd gone over it too many times. She said she knew men in Tucson who'd pay good money for two healthy girls with no people to come looking. The room went very still. Ruby looked at Mason. He was looking at the table. His jaw was set. That's when you ran, Ruby said to Emma. I heard it too, Emma said, from the back door. I went and got Lily, and we left that night. She paused. Mason found us on the road 2 days later. I was heading through that county for work, Mason said, quiet. Found them in a ditch. We weren't in a ditch, Lily said, with a flash of dignity that was almost funny. We were beside the road. You were in a ditch, Mason said. It was shallow, but it was a ditch. Lily considered this and didn't argue further. Ruby sat with it all for a moment. The weight of it. A 7-year-old who'd heard herself described as a commodity and had been carrying that for weeks. All right, Ruby said. Here's what we're going to do. She looked at both girls. Tonight you sleep, both of you. No worrying. That's my job tonight. She looked at Mason. After they're in bed, we talk. Boo. She gave the girls the bed again. Emma accepted this without comment. Lily asked if she could have the blanket with the yellow stripe, and Ruby said yes, and that was the end of the negotiation. Ruby and Mason sat at the table with the lamp turned low and the night quiet outside. She'll have the sheriff with her tomorrow, Mason said. You said so yourself. The sheriff here is Walt Greer, Ruby said. I know him. Not well, but enough. He's not a bad man. He's a cautious one. A cautious man will follow the papers. A cautious man will also not want to be wrong, Ruby said. If we give him reason to be uncertain, you'd need something real, Mason said. Something he can look at, not just what Lily heard. He rubbed the back of his neck. A child's word against a respectable woman with legal papers. Lily's word plus whatever else we can find, Ruby said. Does Martha Collins have a reputation anywhere? People who know what she is? The man in Prescott who warned me, Mason said. Name of Aldous Farron. He ran a freight station there. He told me he'd seen her twice before with children, different ones, and both times the children disappeared within a month and nobody could say where. He looked at his hands. He said he'd told the sheriff, and the sheriff had listened and done nothing. Because she had people in the office, Ruby said, remembering what he'd told her the night before. That's what he said. But Farron himself, he'd talk if someone came to him directly. He'd talk to the right person. Mason paused. Problem is, Prescott's 3 days hard ride, and she'll be here at first light. Ruby was quiet, thinking it through. There's a telegraph in Cutter's Junction, 8 miles. She looked at the lamp. If I rode out tonight, you're not riding 8 miles alone at night. She looked at him. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I just mean... I know what you mean, she said, and I'm not offended. But if you think the alternative of sitting here waiting for morning is better, tell me why. He didn't have an answer for that. I'll be back before dawn, she said. You stay with the girls. He looked at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. If something goes wrong, he said. If something goes wrong, you know where the rifle is, Ruby said, and you've got 2 fence posts worth of evidence that you can solve most problems if you think them through long enough. He didn't smile exactly, but his expression shifted in the direction of it. You're not what I expected, he said, when you opened the door last night. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who'd send us back out into the rain. I thought about it, Ruby said honestly. I know you did. She stood up and got her coat. Hot. The ride to Cutter's Junction was cold, and the road was still soft in places from the rain, and her mare, Della, was not delighted about being asked to work in the dark. Ruby let her pick her pace on the soft stretches and pushed her only on the firm ground, and they made it in under 2 hours, which was better than Ruby had counted on. The telegraph office was above the general store, and the night operator was a thin young man named Chet, who looked like he'd been asleep face down on his desk and was not entirely certain he wasn't still. He blinked at Ruby in the lamplight. Mrs. Bennett, he said. She'd been in twice before, enough that he knew her face. Miss, she said, same as always. Right. Sorry. He straightened up. It's late. I know. I need to send a wire. To who? Aldous Farron, freight station in Prescott. She'd written the message on a scrap of paper on the ride over, working it out in her head. She passed it across the counter. And I need you to wait for a reply. Chet looked at the paper. Read it. Read it again. This is about Martha Collins, he said, something in his voice. You know that name, Ruby said. He looked up at her. He was young, maybe 20, and he'd gone from half asleep to very alert in about 4 seconds. She came through here 6 weeks ago, he said, with 2 little boys, sending a wire to someone in Tucson. He set the paper down. I'm not supposed to read the messages, but the office was small and He stopped. She was loud about it, talking over the wire while I was sending, said the boys would be delivered by end of the month and to have the payment ready in silver. Ruby stood very still. You didn't tell anyone, she said. I told Sheriff Greer. His voice went tight. He said there were a dozen innocent explanations for a thing like that, and not to go making trouble. Did the boys come back through town? Chet shook his head. Slowly. Ruby picked up her pencil and wrote a second name below Farron's. Is there a federal marshal anywhere near this territory, a name you trust? Chet thought about it. Marshal Dade Corwin. He's out of the Yuma office, but he runs routes through here twice a month. He hesitated. He stopped in 3 weeks ago and asked if I'd seen anything unusual. He's looking for something, I think. Or someone. Send the wire to Farron, Ruby said. And if Corwin's got a telegraph address in Yuma, send one there too. Tell him Tell him you have a witness statement and a named party and a location and he needs to move. Chet was already at the key. Miss Bennett, he said, not looking up, fingers moving. If she finds out, her name's going to be attached to something federal before this week's out, Ruby said. She won't have time to worry about a telegraph operator. She hoped that was true. She said it like it was true, which was the only way to say a thing when you weren't certain. She waited an hour and a half for Farron's reply. When it came, Chet read it and then read it again and then passed it across the counter without a word. Farron had written 4 sentences. The last one said, "I will come myself. Keep the girls safe." Nah. Ruby got back to the ranch as the sky was going from black to the deep blue that came just before the first gray light. Della walked the last half-mile at her own pace and Ruby led her, too tired to argue with a horse. Mason was on the porch, not asleep. Sitting on the step she'd found him on the afternoon before, when Martha's carriage had come down the road. He stood up when he heard hoofbeats. She dismounted, and he took Della's reins without being asked and led the horse to the hitching post. "Well," he said. "Farron's coming," she said, "and there may be a federal marshal." He went still. "I found a witness in town," she said. "The telegraph operator. He heard Collins arranging something 6 weeks ago. 2 boys, Tucson. Payment in silver." "Boys," Mason said. "Not the girls." "She's done this more than once," Ruby said. "More than twice, maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "Corwin," he said. "You said Federal Marshal Corwin? You know him?" "By reputation, out of Yuma." He looked at the ground. "If Corwin's involved—" He stopped. "That changes things." "That's what I'm hoping," Ruby said. She took Della's reins back and led her to the barn, and Mason walked alongside her without being invited and without making a production of it. He just came along and unlatched the barn door and held it while she walked the horse in. She got Della unsaddled and into her stall, and they stood in the dim of the barn for a moment, smelling of hay and horse and the cold outside still on their coats, and the silence between them was different now than it had been at the table, less formal. "You rode 8 miles in the dark for children who aren't yours," Mason said. "You've been protecting them for 6 weeks," Ruby said. "I rode 8 miles. It's not the same." "No," she said. "It's not. You've done more." She looked at him. "That's what I mean." He looked at Della, who was already at her grain, looked at the wall, then at Ruby. "Why?" he said, not challenging, genuinely asking. "You'd never seen us before last night. You had no reason—" "The way you stood at the door," Ruby said. "That's why." She hung up the bridle. "You asked for nothing for yourself. A man who's running a game asks for what he needs first and dresses it up. You were so busy making sure I wouldn't be afraid that you were going to stand in that rain all night." She turned around. "I know what people look like when they're performing. I was married to someone who performed. You weren't performing." He didn't say anything. "Also," Ruby said, "Lily laughed at supper and you looked like someone had handed you something you'd given up hoping for. You can't fake that." A pause. "She doesn't laugh much," he said. "She used to, I think. Before." "She'll get it back," Ruby said. She said it like she meant it, which she did, and he heard that she meant it, and something in his face changed in a way that was too small to name, but not small enough to miss. They went back to the house, home. Morning came in pale and cold, and Ruby made coffee and oatmeal, and everyone ate, and it was almost ordinary except for the thing hanging over all of it that nobody named out loud. Emma knew. She ate her breakfast with the same precision and then washed her bowl without being asked, and then sat at the table and said, "She's coming today." "Yes," Ruby said. "With the sheriff." "Maybe." Emma looked at her. "Definitely," she said. "She'll want it to look legal." 9 years old. Ruby thought about Emma at 9, in a house with a sick mother and a father stretched thin, learning very quickly how the world actually operated versus how adults claimed it did. "We have something she doesn't know about," Ruby said. "What?" "Someone coming who can speak to what she is. And a man in town who heard her arranging business that'll interest certain law officers very much." Emma absorbed this. Will it be enough? She said. Ruby looked at her straight. I don't know, she said, but it's more than we had yesterday. Emma nodded once. That was all. She got up and went to help Lily finish getting dressed. Mason came in from outside where he'd been since first light, moving around the ranch in the early quiet. He had more coffee and stood at the window. She'll be here by 9, he said. Probably, Ruby said. He turned from the window. If it goes wrong, if Greer takes the girls, he won't, Ruby said. But if he does, then I ride hard to catch Farron on his way in and you put... She stopped. You don't run. Running makes us look like the bad side. You stay. You answer questions. You tell the truth about everything. He looked at her. I know, she said. I know that's asking a lot when you don't trust the law. I've had reason not to, he said, measured. Walt Greer's not perfect, Ruby said, but he's not bought. I'd bet my land on that, and this land is all I've got. He was quiet for a moment. That's a serious bet, he said. Yes, she said. It is. The morning stretched. They didn't talk much. Ruby mended a tear in a work shirt. Mason carved a small thing from a scrap of wood with his pocket knife. She didn't know what it was going to be, but his hands needed something to do. Lily watched him do it until Emma pulled her away to sit by the window with a book Ruby had offered them the night before, an old almanac that Lily treated like it was considerably more exciting than it probably was. At 8:30, Ruby heard horses on the road. She put down the shirt. Mason's hands went still on the wood. Stay in, he said to the girls, without raising his voice. Ruby was already moving to the door. There were 3 of them this time. Martha Collins in the carriage, the same driver, and riding alongside the carriage, Sheriff Walt Greer on his gray horse. Greer was a big man, heavy-shouldered, with a gray mustache and the permanent squint of someone who'd spent 40 years looking into the Arizona sun. He rode the way men rode when they were doing their job and weren't happy about it. Ruby stood on the porch. Greer pulled up at the foot of the steps and took his hat off. He always took his hat off before he said anything, which was a habit Ruby had always found both old-fashioned and oddly reassuring. Morning, Miss Bennett, he said. Sheriff? You know why I'm here? I have a guess. Martha had gotten out of the carriage and was standing behind and to Greer's left, hands folded, the pleasant expression firmly in place. I have papers, Greer said. He didn't reach for them. Establishing guardianship, courts, and Flagstaff. He looked directly at her. I don't love this errand. I want you to know that. But the law's the law. The law can be used, Ruby said, and it can be misused. You know the difference, Walt. He looked at her steadily. I know what the papers say. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. When was the last time you talked to a child who was frightened of the person claiming guardianship, Ruby said, and looked into it? A pause. His jaw moved. I'd like to speak with the girls, Ruby said. Right here, in front of you. No coaching, no prompting. You can watch every second, and after that, if you still want to follow those papers, I won't stop you. Martha's voice came from behind Greer, smooth and controlled. Sheriff, this is a delay tactic. The children are mine by law and... Miss Collins, Greer said without turning around. I'm talking. Silence. He looked at Ruby, then at the door, then back at Ruby. 5 minutes, he said. Ruby opened the cabin door and said, Emma, can you come out here, please? Emma came out. She'd known, Ruby thought. She'd been listening for her name. She stepped out onto the porch and stood next to Ruby and looked at Sheriff Greer with the kind of clear, direct eye contact that made adults uncomfortable because it didn't look like a child's. Emma, Greer said. He crouched down slightly to be closer to her height, which was the right thing to do, and Ruby gave him credit for it. Do you know who I am? The sheriff, Emma said. That's right. My name's Walt Greer. I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me what's true, not what anyone told you to say, all right? Nobody told me to say anything, Emma said. Miss Bennett told me to tell the truth, which is what I was already going to do. Greer glanced at Ruby. Ruby kept her face neutral. Do you want to go with that woman? Greer said, nodding toward Martha. Careful. Not naming, not leading. Emma looked at Martha. Martha smiled. Emma looked back at Greer. She's going to sell us, Emma said, flat as stone. I heard her say it. Lily heard her say it. She told a man that we'd be worth more than our father's land. She paused. If you take us to her, we'll be gone inside a month. She's done it before. There were 2 boys. Greer stood up slowly. He turned and looked at Martha Collins. Martha's smile had not changed, but her eyes had. Something cold had surfaced in them, very briefly, before the pleasantness came back down over it like a curtain. A child's frightened imagination, Martha said, pleasant as pouring tea. She's been with this man for weeks. Goodness knows what stories he's told them. He didn't tell us anything, Emma said, and her voice was louder now, not quite steady. He found us on the road, and he kept us safe, and he's the only grown-up who believed us when we said what we heard. He didn't tell us stories. He listened to ours. The porch was very quiet. Greer's hand had moved without apparent intention to the edge of his gun belt, not reaching, just resting. Sheriff, Martha said, and her voice had changed, still controlled, but working harder. I must insist. There were 2 boys, Ruby said. 6 weeks ago. Telegraph office here in town. She wired someone in Tucson about a delivery. Payment in silver. She watched Greer's face. Chet Purdy. Ask him. Something shifted in Walt Greer's expression. He'd known Chet Purdy since the boy was 12. And there's a man named Aldous Farron coming from Prescott, Ruby said. Should be here by tomorrow if he pushed through last night. He's got his own account to give. She looked at Greer steadily. And I've sent word to Federal Marshal Corwin in Yuma. The name landed. Greer knew it. She could see that. Corwin's name had a particular weight in this territory. Martha Collins said nothing. The quiet on that porch had a texture to it now. Ruby could hear Lily inside, moving around, and the sound of the fire, and somewhere down the road a horse shaking its head in the morning cool. Greer turned and looked at Martha Collins for a long moment. Ma'am, he said, I'm going to ask you to hold off for now. You cannot be serious, Martha said. The pleasantness had cracked, just along one edge. I have legal papers, which I'll review with a clear head and someone who knows the county court, Greer said. In the meantime, the girls stay here. He looked at Ruby. Miss Bennett, you're willing to take responsibility. Yes, Ruby said. If this turns out to be nothing, it won't, she said. He held her gaze. Then he put his hat back on, which was apparently how he ended conversations. I'll go talk to Chet Purdy, he said. He turned his horse and went back down the road. He didn't look at Martha Collins as he passed her. Martha stood by her carriage for a moment. The pleasant expression was gone entirely now. What was underneath it was not something Ruby had a clean word for. Controlled rage had edges to it, and what was on Martha Collins's face had edges, sharp ones, and she looked at Ruby with them for a long moment before she got back in the carriage. The carriage went down the road. Ruby stood on the porch and watched it go, and her legs, she noticed, were not entirely steady. She'd been holding herself very straight, and the holding had cost something. Emma was still beside her. Did that work? Emma asked. We bought time, Ruby said. Emma looked up at her. Is that the same thing? Right now, Ruby said. It's close enough. She put her hand on Emma's shoulder briefly and went back inside where Mason was standing just inside the door with his hand flat against the wall and his eyes on the window, watching the road, watching the carriage until it turned the corner and disappeared from view. He turned. Corwin, he said, you used that name. I did. If he comes, he will, Ruby said, or someone from his office. She pulled off her coat and hung it on the hook. Farron first, then we'll know more. Mason looked at her. At the coat on the hook, at her hands, which were not entirely steady either. You're scared, he said. Yes, she said, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. Aren't you? He thought about it honestly. I've been scared since Prescott, he said. I'm almost used to it. Well, Ruby said, I'm not quite used to it yet, so give me a minute. She went to the stove and got herself a cup of coffee and stood there with both hands around it, letting the warmth come through. And Mason didn't say anything else and didn't go anywhere, just stood in the room with her while she got her footing back. That too was something she noticed, the way he could be present without pushing on it, the way he understood that some moments didn't need filling. From the back of the cabin, Lily called out, "Is the mean lady gone?" "She's gone," Mason called back. "Good," said Lily. "Can I come out now?" "Come out," he said. And she did, padding out in her socks with the yellow striped blanket still trailing from one hand, and she went to stand next to Mason and leaned against his arm, the way children leaned against things they trusted, and he put his hand briefly on top of her head and then took it away again because he was not a man who made gestures large. Ruby watched them and drank her coffee and thought, whatever comes next, whatever Farron brings, and whatever Corwin decides, and whatever Martha Collins does when she stops being controlled about it, this part is real. These 4 people in this room. This is the part that's real. She was going to fight to keep it. Aldous Farron arrived the next afternoon on a roan horse that had clearly been pushed hard and was not pleased about it. He was a compact man in his late 50s with a short gray beard and the hands of someone who had spent decades loading and unloading heavy things. He rode into Ruby's yard, looked at the cabin, looked at the barn, looked at Mason standing by the fence, and said, before he'd even fully dismounted, "You're Hawk." "That's right," Mason said. "Farron." He got down and tied his horse and shook Mason's hand with the efficiency of a man who didn't waste movements. "Where are the girls?" "Inside." "Good." He looked toward the road. "I passed a carriage on the way in. Fancy one. Driver looked at me like he was counting something." "Martha Collins," Mason said. "She's still in the area." It wasn't a question. Farron's face did something tight. "I was afraid of that. She doesn't usually work this slow. She must be feeling boxed in." Ruby had come out onto the porch. Farron looked at her. "Miss Bennett," he said, "your wire found me on the road out of Prescott, not at the station. I'd already been moving." He came up the steps. "I wrote to Corwin 6 weeks ago about the boys. He wrote back asking for names and dates. I gave them. Then I heard nothing." "Corwin may be coming," Ruby said. "I sent a wire through the Cutter's Junction office." "If he got it, he'll come," Farron said. "Corwin's not a man who leaves things unfinished. It's his one good quality, and it covers a lot of ground." He stopped at the door. "Can I sit down? I've been in the saddle since before light." "Come in," Ruby said. "Us." Farron sat at the table and drank 2 cups of coffee without pausing between them and told them what he knew, which was considerably more than he'd been able to put in a telegram. Martha Collins had been operating for at least 4 years that he could trace. She moved through territories, never staying long enough to establish a reputation in any single place. She identified orphaned children, specifically those without extended family or with family too scattered or poor to mount much of a search, and she used legal paperwork that was real enough on its surface to satisfy local authorities who weren't looking too hard. "The guardianship papers," Ruby said. "Legitimate county clerk," Farron said. "Different county each time. She's got someone, probably multiple someones, who can generate the paperwork fast and clean. By the time anyone looks close, the children are already moved." "Where do they go?" Mason said. Farron looked at the partition where the girls were. Emma had not come out when Farron arrived. She was back there with Lily, and she'd heard him come in, and she was choosing to wait. "She's got buyers in 3 cities that I know of," Farron said, lowering his voice. "Not adoptions. Work arrangements, some of them. Places that use children and don't ask questions about where they came from. Some of them worse than that." He stopped. "I won't say more than that at this table." He didn't need to. Ruby had understood the shape of it from the night Lily had told them what she'd heard, and having the shape confirmed was not something she needed spelled out. "How many children?" Mason said. "That I can count," Farron said. 11, in 4 years. Those are only the ones I could connect back to her with names and dates. The real number is likely more." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight to it. "The boys from 6 weeks ago," Ruby said. "Chet Purdy at the telegraph office here in town. He heard her arranging a delivery to Tucson." Farron set down his cup. "What are their names?" Chet didn't know. "She would have moved them fast," Farron said. "If Corwin's moving on Tucson," he looked at Mason. "Those 2 boys might still be findable." Might. Mason's jaw had gone hard. She was going to do the same to Lily and Emma. "Yes," Farron said. "She was." He said it plain, no softening, the way you said a true thing that didn't benefit from being cushioned. She's desperate right now, Farron continued. Woman like her, desperation changes the arithmetic. She's been able to operate because nobody's had the pieces together. You've put the pieces together, or close to it. She knows that. He looked at Ruby. You need to be careful, genuinely careful. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because when people like her feel cornered, they make the same mistake. They try to accelerate. Accelerate, Ruby said. Move faster. Take what they came for before the door closes. He looked at the window. She hasn't left the area. That means she's still intending to take those girls. She's waiting for something, either a better opportunity or more leverage. What leverage could she get? Mason said. Farron looked at him, something careful in his eyes. You, he said, you're the weak point. No family here, no standing, no papers. She could have you arrested on any number of complaints, interference with guardianship rights, kidnapping, whatever her lawyer drafts up. You'd be in a cell before you could tell your story, and the girls would be gone before you got out. Mason nodded slowly. He'd known this. It was in his face, the recognition of something he'd been sitting with for days. She won't move on the ranch directly, Farron said. Too many witnesses now. But you, he looked at Mason. You go to town, you go to the road alone, you're exposed. So I don't go to town, Mason said. So you don't go anywhere, Farron said. Not until Corwin or someone like him is physically present. That evening was the longest Ruby could remember in a while. Not long in the way of bad things happening. Nothing happened, which was almost worse because the waiting had a sound to it, a low, constant tension that hummed under everything like a wasp in the walls. She made supper and they ate, and Farron told the girls a story about a mule that had once refused to cross a creek in Yuma for 3 days and the creative solutions people had attempted, and Lily laughed twice, which was something, and Emma listened with her arms on the table and her chin on her arms, and looked for a few minutes like a child rather than a small, exhausted adult. After the girls were in bed, Farron and Ruby and Mason sat up, not talking much. Farron cleaned his rifle with the focused calm of long habit. Mason worked on the small carved piece. It was becoming a bird of some kind, Ruby thought, though the wings weren't fully defined yet. Ruby mended things and tried not to listen to every sound from outside. At some point after 10, she became aware that Mason was looking at her. You should sleep, he said. So should you. I don't. He stopped, started again. I sleep light in new places. I'll hear anything that's worth hearing. I sleep light everywhere, Ruby said. Always have. Farron made a sound that might have been amusement. Neither of you is going to sleep, he said without looking up from the rifle. So stop telling each other to. It's not helpful. Ruby looked at him. How do you do it? Travel like this? Chase something that doesn't want to be found. You've been at this for, you said 6 weeks since the boys. Longer than that, Farron said. The first time I saw one of her arrangements fall apart, that was going on 3 years ago now. Little girl out of a town south of here. Nobody came looking. I came looking. Couldn't prove anything. Couldn't make anything stick. He set the cleaned rifle across his knees. But I remembered her name. Martha Collins, Ruby said. Martha Collins. His voice was dry and unadorned. You remember the name of someone who does harm and walks away from it. You just remember it, and then one day it comes back around. And if Corwin doesn't come, Mason said, if the federal angle doesn't open up, then we work with what we have, Farron said. Sheriff Greer, Chet Purdy's testimony, what the girls heard, the pattern of the other cases I can document. It's not nothing. It might not be enough to put her away, but it'll be enough to make those guardianship papers a liability instead of an asset. She won't want the scrutiny. And she leaves, Mason said. And she leaves, Farron said, for now, until she finds another angle. The word hung there. For now, Mason repeated. I know, Farron said. It's not satisfying, but I've been doing this long enough to know that permanent solutions come in stages. First stage is getting those girls to safety that lasts more than a week. He looked at Mason. Second stage is building a case that holds. Mason looked at his hands, at the half-carved bird. She'll find other children, he said, while we're building. Farron was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. She might. That's the part I can't fix tonight. That's the part that makes it hard to sleep. He put the rifle aside. But 11 children I know of. That stops here, these two, tonight. And then we work forward. It's the only way I know to do it. Ruby looked at both of them and thought about the different kinds of courage. The obvious kind, that came out fast in a crisis. And the other kind, the kind that got up the next day after failing to do enough and kept going anyway. She thought Farron had a lot of the second kind. She went to bed eventually. She didn't sleep well. She didn't think any of them did. The morning of the third day, Ruby was at the stove when she saw through the window a rider coming down the road from the direction of town, moving fast. She turned without speaking, and Mason was already at the door. It was Chet Purdy, riding a horse that was clearly borrowed and several sizes too large for him. He pulled up in the yard and nearly slid off getting down. "Miss Bennett," he said, breathing hard. He looked at Mason, then at Farron, who had come around the side of the cabin. "Something happened last night. I need to tell you." "Come in," Ruby said. He came in and stood in the middle of the room with his hat in his hands. He was pale under the tan. "She came to the office," he said. "Martha Collins. Last night, about 9 o'clock. Came in with a man I didn't know. Big man, suit that didn't fit him right, like he'd borrowed it." Chet paused. "She said she needed to send a wire. I let her. She wrote it out herself and stood right there while I sent it." "What did it say?" Farron said. He'd gone very still. "I'm not supposed to—" "Chet," Ruby said. He looked at her, then at the floor. "It was to a man in Tucson," he said. "Name of R. Voss. She said there was a complication in Cutter's Junction, and she needed the situation resolved. She said—" He swallowed. "She said the Apache was the problem, and removing him would clear the way." The room went quiet. Mason stood near the window. He didn't move. His expression had gone to somewhere flat and closed that Ruby couldn't read. "Removing him," Farron said. "Those words specifically." "Those exact words," Chet said. "I know because He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "I wrote it down right after she left. My hand was shaking." Farron took the paper and read it and passed it to Ruby. She read it. The handwriting was Chet's, uneven and fast, but the words were clear. "Complication in CJ Apache is the problem. Removing him will clear the way. Package still available. Send your man. R." "Voss," Farron said. "Do you know that name?" Chet shook his head. Farron looked at Mason. Something passed between them. Recognition, Ruby thought. Mason knew the name. "Voss runs a courier operation out of Tucson," Mason said, his voice careful and even. "Moves things between the territory and the border, things that don't travel on public roads." He paused. "He's the one who pays her, I think. The man in Prescott mentioned a name. I didn't connect it until right now." "She just told her buyer to send muscle," Farron said. "Yes," Mason said. "And how far is Tucson?" "Day and a half hard riding," Ruby said. Farron looked at the door, looked at Mason, looked at Ruby. "If someone left Tucson last night," he said. "They'd be here tomorrow morning at earliest," Mason said. "Tonight, if they changed horses." Ruby turned to Chet. "Did you send the wire to Corwin's office like I asked, before she came in?" "I sent it," Chet said. "Day before yesterday. I sent the address you gave me and everything I knew, but I haven't had a reply." "Yuma to here is—" "How long?" Ruby said. "Corwin's not in Yuma," Farron said. "He runs routes. He could be anywhere in 3 territories." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. He could also have gotten the wire and already be moving, and we'd have no way of knowing. Ruby looked at Mason. He was looking at the window again, that particular fixed look of a man calculating distances and times and not liking the numbers. "She's trying to separate you from the girls," Ruby said. "If something happens to you, it's just me and Farron and 2 children against her legal papers. Farron has no standing here either." "I have standing," Farron said. "Just not legal standing." "Which is the kind that counts when she shows up with a sheriff," Mason said. He turned from the window. I need to go to town, he said. No, Farron said immediately. Not to walk around. To talk to Greer. Mason looked at Ruby. Face to face. Not through you, not through Chet. Me. My account. In Greer's office. On record. If something happens to me after that, it's a different kind of problem for her. It puts me in the official record. It also puts you on the road, Ruby said. I know. Alone, she said. You'd be going alone. You need to stay here, he said. Farron needs to stay here. The girls will have Farron, Ruby said. I'll go with you. He looked at her. Don't argue with me, she said. 2 people on the road is twice the witness if something happens. And I know Walt Greer better than you do. I can read whether he's listening or just waiting us out. A beat of silence. All right, Mason said. It was not enthusiastic, but it was agreement. Chet, Ruby said, go straight back to town. Stay in the office. If anyone comes asking where we are, you don't know. She looked at him. Can you do that? Chet Purdy was 20 years old and not made for this kind of thing, and his face showed it. But he squared his thin shoulders and said, Yes, ma'am, and went back to his borrowed horse. Farron walked them to the horses. He stood at the gate with his hands in his coat pockets and looked at Mason in the way of a man who wants to say something and is trying to decide if it would help or not. I'll be here, he said, finally. Both of them will be here when you get back. I know, Mason said. I mean it. Anyone comes through that gate before you do, they'll have to come through me first, and I've been in worse positions than this. Mason nodded. He looked at Farron for a moment. Something passing between them that was both simple and not simple. 2 men who'd been on different roads for a long time and ended up at the same gate. Take care of Lily, Mason said. She has bad dreams sometimes. If she wakes up, tell her the mule story, Farron said. Mason almost smiled. Tell her the mule story, he agreed. Ruby was already mounted. Mason swung up beside her and they went down the drive and turned toward town and didn't look back because looking back didn't help anything. The road to Cutter's Junction was empty and dry in the morning light. They rode at a pace that was fast enough to be purposeful and slow enough to keep their eyes on the landscape around them. Ruby had her rifle across the saddle. Mason had said nothing about this, and she had offered no explanation. About 2 miles out, he said, How'd you end up here, alone? If you don't mind saying. I was married, Ruby said. You know that part. I know the result, he said. Not the rest. She thought about whether to tell it. It wasn't a story she found comfortable. Not because it was shameful, she'd long since stopped thinking of it as shameful, but because it was the kind of story that required her to admit she'd been wrong in ways that felt avoidable. His name was Thomas Hale, she said. I met him in Albuquerque when I was 22. He was charming and capable, and everyone liked him, which I mistook for meaning he was good. She kept her eyes on the road. He was good at performing goodness, which is not the same thing. By the time I worked out the difference, we were married and the ranch was mortgaged, and he had business arrangements with 3 men I didn't know about and didn't like when I found out. What kind of arrangements? The kind that use other people's land as collateral without telling them, Ruby said. He'd used the deed, signed my name, she paused. I found out because one of the 3 men came to the door when Thomas was away and wanted to know when we were paying the note. Mason was quiet. I paid it, she said. Took everything I had and 2 years of work after, but I paid it, and I told Thomas to leave, and he left. She looked at the road ahead. He didn't argue. That was the part that told me what I needed to know about how much it had ever meant to him. He just left. And you stayed, Mason said. It's my land, Ruby said. My father's before mine. I wasn't going to let what Thomas did take it. She paused. And I didn't know where else I'd go. This is the only place I've ever known how to be. Mason rode without speaking for a bit. The road curved and they came up over a small rise and the town was visible in the distance, church steeple and mill wheel and the line of buildings on Main Street. I don't have a place like that, Mason said. He said it matter-of-factly, not asking for anything in return. I know, Ruby said. Never have, he said. When I was young there was... But that's gone. He glanced at her and away. I've been moving since I was 17. That's a long time, she said. It is, he said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Lily and Emma, Ruby said. When this is over, what happens to them? He was quiet for a beat too long. I don't know, he said. I've been trying not to think past the problem in front of me. But you've thought about it. Yes, he said. At night, mostly, when I can't stop my head. He exhaled. The job in Tucson, the job that the man in the outline of your story offered you, Ruby said carefully. Is that still something you want? It was a way forward, he said. For them. Stable place, good man. I was going to work, save money, find someone in town who'd take them in proper, pay their keep until they were older. He paused. It was a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the one I had. It assumed they'd be all right with someone else, Ruby said. He looked at the road. It assumed I didn't have a better option, he said, which was true when I made it. They came into town from the south end of Main Street, and the morning was well along now, people moving on the sidewalk, a wagon being loaded outside the general store. A few people looked at them as they rode by. Ruby had grown used to being looked at in this town, and she kept her head up and her face neutral the way she always did. She saw one of the looks last a beat too long, a man outside the barber shop leaning on the post. He wasn't from here. She'd have known him. Don't turn, she said quietly. Man at the barber shop, you see him? Yes, Mason said. Same quiet. I saw him when we turned onto Main. You know him? No, but I know the way he's standing. A pause. Like he's waiting for something specific. Keep going, Ruby said. Greer's office is at the end of the block. They went to the end of the block. She could feel the man behind them without turning, the prickle of being watched by someone whose interest wasn't casual. Sheriff Greer's office was a squat adobe building with a board sign above the door that needed repainting. They tied up outside and went in. Greer was at his desk. He looked up when they came in, and his expression went through several things in rapid sequence. Recognition, something like resignation, and then a kind of alert attention that told Ruby he'd already been thinking about them this morning. Miss Bennett, he said, and you'd be Hawk. I would, Mason said. Sit down, Greer said. They sat. The office smelled of old coffee and gun oil and paper. A deputy Ruby didn't recognize was in the back, visible through an open door, pretending to be busy with something. I've talked to Chet Purdy, Greer said. He folded his hands on the desk. And I sent a wire to the county clerk's office in Flagstaff about those guardianship papers. He paused. The clerk they listed as signing them resigned 8 months ago. Nobody's in that position currently. Ruby looked at Mason. He looked at her. The papers are fraudulent, Ruby said. The papers have a fraudulent signature, Greer said, which was careful. Whether that makes them void depends on who you ask and how fast a lawyer can get here. He looked at Mason directly. I also talked to Abe Fisher at the hotel. Miss Collins has a room there. She checked in 3 days ago with one companion, a man named Pierce, according to the register. He paused. Pierce has 2 priors in California. Assault, and something that was settled out of court that Fisher said he'd heard about secondhand. He's her muscle, Mason said. That's a reasonable reading, Greer said. He was being very measured about all of this, Ruby noticed. Careful with his words. Greer was a man who'd spent his career saying things he might have to repeat in front of a judge. Last night she sent a wire, Ruby said, to a man named R. Voss in Tucson. She told him the Apache was the problem and asked him to send his man. Greer was quiet. Chet wrote it down right after she left, Ruby said. He's got it at the office. I'll talk to Chet, Greer said. When? Mason said. Now, Greer said. He stood up. Come with me. They were at the telegraph office, Greer reading Chet's handwritten transcription with the focused attention of a man building a case in his head, when the door opened behind them. Ruby turned. The man from outside the barber shop was in the doorway. He was big, genuinely big, the kind that wasn't about muscle alone, but about the density of someone who'd taken damage and stopped feeling it the way other people did. He had a wide, flat face and pale eyes, and he was wearing the suit that Chet had described. Too good for him, borrowed feeling. He looked at Mason first, then at Ruby, then at Greer. "Sheriff," he said. Neutral, like he was noting a fact. Greer had turned at the sound of the door. He looked at the man the way he'd looked at Martha Collins on the porch. Professionally neutral, giving nothing. "You'd be Pierce," Greer said. Something shifted in Pierce's expression. He hadn't expected the name. "Miss Collins asked me to see if her friends had arrived," he said. "She's been waiting at the hotel." "Her friends," Ruby said. Pierce looked at her. There was something behind his pale eyes that Ruby did not like. Not because it was threatening, though it was, but because it was calculating. The look of a man who was assessing value. "The children," Pierce said. "The girls. Miss Collins would like to see them." "Miss Collins can direct any concerns about the children to my office," Greer said, "in writing, during business hours." He looked at Pierce without expression. "We're busy here." A pause. Pierce's eyes moved from Greer to Mason and back. "Of course," he said. "Pleasant." Performed pleasantness. Ruby knew exactly what that looked like now. "I'll let her know." He left. The door closed. "Well," Greer said, and his voice had gone dry. "That's Pierce." He looked at Chet. "You said a big man in a borrowed suit came with her last night." "That's him," Chet said. His voice had gone thin. Greer looked at the transcription in his hand, then at Mason, then at Ruby. "You two should not be on the road alone," he said. "We're aware," Ruby said. "I mean right now," Greer said. "Pierce went out that door with something to do. I don't know what she's told him exactly, but whatever it is, it won't happen in my town in daylight." He paused. "It might happen on the road." Mason stood up. "We need to get back to the ranch." "I know," Greer said. "I'm going to ride with you." They looked at him. "The girls are at your property," Greer said to Ruby. "Under your care, which I authorized. That makes it my business." He got his hat from the rack. "And I'd like to have a conversation with this Aldous Farron you mentioned. Man who's been tracking her for 3 years is a man I want to talk to." They rode 3 abreast where the road was wide enough, and Greer took the outside on the left, and Mason took the right, and Ruby was in the middle, which she wasn't entirely pleased about, but recognized the tactical sense of. Greer had sent his deputy to watch Pierce in the hotel, with instructions not to be obvious about it. The road was quiet. Nothing came at them from the brush. Nobody followed, or if they did it well enough not to be seen. Ruby kept her eyes moving and her hand near the rifle and tried not to think about Farron alone at the ranch with the girls and a long morning stretching in front of him. Halfway back, Greer said, without preamble, "The 2 boys. From Tucson. I looked into it after you told me about Chet's wire." He was looking at the road ahead. "There's a report filed in Tucson 3 weeks ago. 2 boys, ages 8 and 10, brought in by a woman claiming to be their aunt. Boys placed with a family outside the city." He paused. "Family can't be located. No fixed address on file." "She moved them already," Mason said. "Or the family address was false from the start," Greer said. The silence had a different quality now. The weight of those 2 boys, their names unknown, their location unknown, moving through the dark channels of a woman's quiet operation, sat with all 3 of them on the open road. "I should have looked harder the first time Chet told me," Greer said. He said it flat, no drama, just a man accounting to himself. "You didn't have enough then," Ruby said. "I had a feeling," he said. "Should have done more with it." Nobody argued with him, which he didn't seem to expect. They came over the last rise before the ranch road, and Ruby felt the tightness in her chest ease 1 degree when she saw the cabin sitting quiet in the midday light, smoke from the chimney, no signs of disturbance. Farron's roan was still at the rail. Nothing was wrong. She made herself breathe. And then the cabin door opened and Emma came out onto the porch, and when she saw Ruby, she stopped, and something in her face went through a change that was hard to watch, a relaxing of something that had been held very tight. She raised her hand in a small wave. Ruby raised hers back. They rode in. Farron and Greer sat at the table for 2 hours. Ruby kept the coffee coming and stayed at the edge of the conversation, and the girls were in and out, Lily interrupting twice with questions that were irrelevant to the conversation, and Farron answering both of them with complete seriousness, before returning to Greer. Emma sat in the corner with the almanac and read, or appeared to read. Ruby suspected she was listening to every word. Greer had brought paper and he wrote as Farron talked. Names, dates, locations, descriptions of transactions, names of other sheriffs and clerks Farron had spoken to in other territories. It went on a long time. Farron had a precise memory for details, and Greer was thorough, and they suited each other in the way that two methodical people sometimes did. Mason had gone out after they arrived. Not far, just to the barn, to the fence line. Moving. He needed to move, Ruby had come to understand. When he was working something through, he worked it through with his hands. She went out to find him at the barn in the middle of the afternoon. He was replacing a board on the barn door that had been loose since before the storm. She hadn't asked him to. He'd just found it and was fixing it. She stood and watched him work a nail with the hammer, setting it clean and even. "Greer's going to write up a formal complaint," she said, "based on Farron's account and Chet's transcription and the clerk's office confirming the fraudulent signature on the papers. He'll file it with the territory court and send copies to the federal office in Yuma." Mason drove the nail home. "How long?" "He says 2-3 days for the filing. If Corwin is moving, if he got the wire, he could be here before that." Mason put down the hammer and looked at the repaired board. "And if Voss sends someone before Corwin gets here," he said. "Greer's watching the hotel," Ruby said. "And Pierce, if Pierce moves, Greer's deputy follows. That's one deputy." "I know," she said. He picked up the hammer again and then put it down again. A man who needed his hands busy but couldn't settle to a single thing. "I keep thinking about the boys," he said, "from Tucson." "I know." "She's done this for 4 years," he said. 11 children that Farron found. How many he didn't find?" He turned and looked at Ruby. "And she'll walk away from this with a complaint filed in a territory court, and maybe, some scrutiny she doesn't like. And those boys are still wherever they are." Ruby didn't have an answer to that. There wasn't one. "I know," she said again, because sometimes that was what there was. Just, I know. I see it too. It's not acceptable, and it's also not something we can fix right now, and carrying that is its own kind of weight. Mason looked at her. "How do you do it?" he said. "Stay even. When things are wrong and you can't fix them." "I'm not always even," Ruby said. "I just don't fall apart until there's time for it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the hammer and went back to the barn door and found another loose board she hadn't noticed. She went back inside. It was late afternoon when Greer finally stood up and gathered his papers. He shook Farron's hand and nodded at Ruby and went to the door and then stopped. "Hawk," he said. Mason had come back in at some point, was sitting near the stove. He looked up. "I'm going to put this plainly," Greer said. "You've done right by these girls. I don't always know what to do with a man in your situation. No standing, no papers, no official role, but I know what doing right looks like, and I've been watching it since I walked in here." He paused. "Don't go anywhere. Don't give me a reason to complicate this." Mason looked at him steadily. "I don't plan to." Greer nodded. He went out. The hoofbeats faded down the road toward town. Farron stretched his back and said, "That man is better than he lets on." "He is," Ruby agreed. Lily appeared from the back room where she'd been for the last hour. "Is the bad lady going to go away now?" she said. The 3 adults in the room looked at each other. It was Mason who answered. "We're working on it," he said. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Okay," she said, and went to the stove to see what was happening with supper, because she had decided that stirring things was her job now, and she took it seriously. Ruby watched her and thought about the shape of the next few days. Voss and whoever he sent, Pierce in the hotel room, Martha Collins with her pleasant face and her cold arithmetic, and somewhere out in the territory a federal marshal who may or may not have gotten a telegram from a young man with shaking hands. And on this side of it, 1 ranch, 2 children, 1 man with no papers and everything to prove, 1 freight operator with a 3-year grudge and a precise memory, and herself. She'd been alone on this land for 2 years and thought she knew what that meant. She was starting to understand she hadn't known at all. The night after Greer left was the quietest night they'd had, which should have been reassuring and wasn't. Farron took the first watch without being asked, sitting on the porch with his rifle across his knees and his coffee going cold beside him, the way a man did when he'd forgotten it was there. Mason slept a few hours and took the second watch. Ruby tried to sleep and manage something that wasn't quite it, that shallow, listening kind of rest where every sound from outside pulled her back to the surface. Wind in the scrub brush, an owl somewhere to the north, the creak of the porch boards when Mason shifted his weight. She got up before first light and made coffee, and Mason came in from outside smelling of cold air, and she handed him a cup without speaking, and they stood at the window together and watched the sky go from black to the particular dark blue that came just before gray. "Nothing moved," he said. "I know. I would have heard you." He looked at her sideways. "You were supposed to be sleeping." "I was approximately sleeping," she said. He drank his coffee. "Pierce was still at the hotel when I checked with Greer's deputy last night," he said. "He rode out to the East Road around 9 and came back an hour later. Deputy followed him to a crossroads and then lost him in the dark." "East Road goes toward Prescott," Ruby said. "Or toward nothing," Mason said. "Depends where you turn." They both thought about what was on the East Road and where someone might turn if they were meeting a man coming up from Tucson. "If Voss sent someone the same night she wired," Ruby said, working it through, "they could have been at the crossroads last night." "That's what I've been sitting with," Mason said. He set down the cup. He wasn't restless the way he'd been the day before. He'd gone past restless to something quieter and more focused, the stillness of a man who has done all the thinking available and arrived at a place of simple waiting. "Whatever's coming is already on the road," he said. "We can't stop it from coming. We can only be ready when it gets here." Ruby looked at the window. The sky was going gray now, the scrub brush becoming visible in the early light, the fence posts Mason had set casting long, thin shadows east. "Farron has his rifle," she said. "I have mine. You have—" "Farron's spare pistol," Mason said. "He offered it last night. I took it." She looked at him. "I've used a gun before," he said, and his voice was even and uninflected, not defensive and not explaining, just a fact. "I know you have," she said. She went to wake Farron for coffee. The morning passed in stretches of ordinary and tense. Lily woke up hungry, which was new and which Ruby took as a good sign. Emma braided Lily's hair at the table while Lily ate oatmeal, a process that required Emma to have 3 hands, which she managed by gripping the comb between her knees. Farron watched them with an expression he probably didn't know was on his face, something grandfatherly and sad and careful all at once. Mason was outside. He'd been outside most of the morning, working the property in a way that Ruby realized, after watching him for a while, was not random. He was working the perimeter, checking the sight lines from the barn, from the east fence, from the stand of mesquite at the north corner of the yard. Not building anything, assessing. She went out to him mid-morning. "If someone comes from the East Road," he said without preamble, "they'll come up the draw on the north side. Puts them at the mesquite before they're visible from the cabin." "How long a warning does that give us?" 2 minutes, he said. "Maybe 3 if they're being careful about noise." "And from the south?" "South is open. They'd be visible from the cabin window from a quarter-mile out." He looked at her. "If we have time, put the girls in the barn. Stone walls, 1 door, easier to defend." "If we have time," Ruby said. "If we don't," he said, "the cabin's better than nothing, and the back window has a clear angle on the north draw." She looked at the lay of the land around them, the familiar shape of it that she'd been looking at for years without ever seeing it this way. Distance and cover and approach angles. The ranch is a problem to be solved by someone who wanted to come through it. "You've done this before," she said. "Not the gun. Something larger than that." "Some things," he said. "Were you in the war?" A pause. "The tail end of it. I was young." She didn't ask which side. It didn't seem like the right question. "You know how people move when they mean harm," she said. "Yes," he said. "Simple." "That's why you had the girls sleeping near the wall," she said. "That first night, not near the window." He looked at her for a moment. "You noticed that." "I notice most things," she said. "I just don't always know what they mean until later." He went back to looking at the north draw. A hawk, the actual bird kind, was circling above the mesquite, unhurried, riding the morning thermals. "I want to ask you something," Ruby said. "Go ahead." "After this is over, whatever after looks like, where were you going to go? Not Tucson, not the job. Before all this, was there somewhere you were actually heading toward or just somewhere you were leaving from?" He was quiet for a long moment. The hawk turned in a wide arc and disappeared over the ridge. "I don't know," he said. "Honest answer. I've been leaving from somewhere for so long, I can't always tell the difference anymore." "What were you leaving from?" she said. He thought about it. She could see him deciding how much to say. "A place where I wasn't welcome," he said, "which was most places, and a version of myself that I didn't want to be anymore." He paused. "The man I was at 22 wasn't someone I'd have liked. I've been correcting for it, I suppose, since then. By doing things like spending 6 weeks keeping 2 children safe at considerable personal risk," Ruby said. He glanced at her. That's exactly what it is," she said. "I'm not being sentimental. I'm saying I see the correction and it's working." He looked at the fence line. "You're very direct," he said. "I used to not be," Ruby said. "I spent years being careful about what I said because I thought being careful was being kind. Thomas cured me of that." She looked at the morning. "Now I say the thing. It saves time." The corner of his mouth moved in the way she'd come to recognize. "It does," he said. Greer's deputy, a young man named Harris, whom Ruby had seen around town but never spoken to at length, arrived at the ranch just before noon. He was not in uniform. He was wearing a work coat and a hat pulled low, and he came in from the south road at an easy walk. And if you didn't know to look for something out of the ordinary, you'd have taken him for a farmhand running an errand. He came to the porch and knocked. "Sheriff sent me," he said when Ruby answered. "Didn't want to send a note in case it was intercepted." He looked around the yard, professional habit. "Pierce left the hotel this morning, before 6. He had a bag." Ruby stepped back to let him in. The others were already at the table. Harris came in and stood, hat in hand, and relayed what he knew. Pierce had settled his bill, paid in full, no complaints, friendly to the hotel woman, and ridden out the south gate of town, south. "South goes toward the border," Farron said. "Eventually," Harris said. "But the first 6 miles south of town, there's a fork. Left fork goes toward the border. Right fork curves back east and comes out at the Cutter Road." He paused. "Which is this road?" Everyone in the room understood that. "He's coming here," Mason said. "Sheriff thinks so," Harris said. "I'm here because he wanted someone at the ranch and he couldn't leave town. He's waiting for... He said you'd know what he was waiting for." "Corwin," Ruby said. "He got a reply to the Yuma wire this morning," Harris said. "Marshal Corwin is 3 days east. He sent a deputy ahead, a man named Beaumont. Should be here by tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Mason said. "That's the best he could do," Harris said. "Corwin's deputy is pushing hard." "Tomorrow." And Pierce was already on the Cutter Road. The arithmetic of that sat in the room with them, nobody saying it aloud because it didn't need saying. "Where's Collins?" Farron said. "Still at the hotel," Harris said. "Hasn't left her room all morning, from what the woman there says. But," he paused, "she was seen at the window twice, watching the south road. Watching for Pierce to come back, or watching for something else." "She's waiting for word that the problem's been handled," Mason said. Harris looked at him. "Sheriff thinks the same." "What does Greer want us to do?" Ruby said. "Hold," Harris said. "Keep everyone inside, keep the shutters on the north windows closed, and let him know if anything comes down the road." He looked around the room. "He's coming himself as soon as he can get someone to watch Collins. He said, don't do anything until he gets here if you can help it." "If we can help it," Farron said dry. "Those were his words, sir." Farron looked at Mason. Mason was looking at the wall, doing the arithmetic the same way they all were. "All right," Ruby said. "Harris, you stay. We could use another set of eyes." Harris nodded. He seemed relieved to have been asked rather than left out. Ruby told the girls. She didn't sugarcoat it, and she didn't make it more frightening than it was. She found the middle ground between those two things, which was harder than either. and she sat with them on the bed in the partition and told them that a man who worked for Martha Collins was possibly coming to the ranch today, and that it was going to be all right, but she needed them to do exactly what she said when she said it. Lily was holding the yellow striped blanket. She held it tighter. "Is Mason going to be okay?" she said. "Yes," Ruby said. "You don't know that," Emma said. She said it without accusation, just the reflex of a child who had been told everything was going to be fine before and had learned what that sometimes meant. "You're right," Ruby said. "I don't know that for certain, but I know he's smart and he's careful and he's been handling hard situations for a long time. And I know I'm going to be right there with him." She looked at both of them. "What I need you to do is stay inside. If I open that back window, you go under the bed and you stay there until I come for you or Mason comes for you or Farron comes for you. Nobody else." Lily nodded. Emma nodded once, the decisive kind. "Emma," Ruby said, "if something happens and none of us can get to you, the barn has a loose board on the north wall. Third one up from the ground. You can get through it. The east road is half a mile past the barn. You run east. Don't stop." Emma looked at her. "What about Lily?" "You take Lily with you," Ruby said. "You hold her hand and you run east and you don't stop until you find someone on the road. You tell them your name and you ask for Sheriff Greer in Cutter's Junction." Emma held her gaze, processing. "Okay," she said. Lily was looking at both of them. She'd gone very still. Not the still of a frightened child, but something older, like she was deciding to be brave and making it a deliberate choice. "I can run fast," Lily said. "Emma always says I run too fast, but today, that's good." "Today, that's excellent," Ruby said. She squeezed both their hands and went back out. The afternoon was the slowest Ruby had lived through in recent memory. Farron was at the north window. Harris was on the porch, from which he could see both the south road and the east approach. Mason had positioned himself at the barn, which gave him a sight line on the north draw and put him between that approach and the cabin. Ruby moved between the cabin and the porch, restless in a way she couldn't fix. At 2 in the afternoon, Harris said quietly, "South Road." Ruby stepped out. A rider, coming from the south at a walking pace. Not hurrying, deliberate and unhurried, which was its own kind of information. Mason had come out of the barn. He'd seen it too. The rider came up the drive and stopped 50 feet out. He was not Pierce. He was younger than she'd expected. Late 20s, maybe 30, lean and dark-eyed, wearing trail clothes that were dusty and a hat that had seen serious weather. He had a rifle in his scabbard and a pistol at his hip, and he looked at each of them in sequence, cataloging. "Ruby Bennett," he said. Not a question. "That's right," she said. "Name's Beaumont," he said. "Deputy to Marshal Corwin. I pushed a bit harder than expected." He looked at Mason. "You'd be Hawk." "Yes," Mason said. Beaumont swung down from his horse. "Got your telegram relay from the Yuma office. Corwin sent me ahead." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Letter of authority. I'm authorized to hold, question, and if necessary, detain anyone involved in this matter pending Corwin's arrival." He held the paper out to Ruby. "Can I come in?" Ruby looked at the paper. It had Corwin's seal and his signature, and the federal authority header she recognized from a document she'd seen years ago in her father's files. It looked right. It felt right. But feeling right was not a guarantee. She looked at Farron, who had come to the doorway. Farron looked at the paper in Ruby's hand. He came down the steps and took it and read it with the focused attention of a man who had learned to read official documents carefully. "Corwin's signature," he said. He looked at Beaumont. "He has a habit. He crosses his T's twice. Old habit, letters real." Beaumont looked at him. "You know Corwin?" "I know his handwriting," Farron said. "Come in." But Beaumont drank half a cup of coffee before he spoke, and what he said rearranged the room. "Our Voss," he said, "is not primarily in the courier business. Or rather, the courier business is how he explains the money. What he actually runs is a distribution network." He looked at Farron. "You've been tracking Collins for 3 years. Voss is the reason she's been able to operate for 4. He's the market. She's the supply." Farron sat back. The expression on his face was the expression of a man who has been told something he suspected and is not glad to have confirmed. "The boys from Tucson," Ruby said. "Recovered," Beaumont said. Day before yesterday. Corwin's office raided a property outside Tucson. Both boys are with a decent family in the city while we sort out their people. He paused. Voss was at the property. He's in custody. The room went very quiet. Voss is in custody, Mason said. Since 2 days ago, Beaumont said, which means the wire Collins sent him. She doesn't know, Ruby said. She does not know, Beaumont said. She wired a man who was already in a federal cell. The person who received that wire was one of Corwin's people monitoring Voss's communications. He looked around the table. Pierce, whoever he is acting on instructions from a woman who no longer has the backing she thinks she has. The arithmetic changed completely. Pierce was coming up the Cutter Road with what he thought was the weight of Voss's operation behind him. He had no idea that weight was gone. He's still dangerous, Mason said. A man like that doesn't stop because his employer's circumstances have changed. He stops when he knows they've changed. Agreed, Beaumont said. Which is why I'm here. I need to intercept Pierce before he reaches this property. He's already on the road, Harris said. Left town before 6 this morning. Beaumont looked at Harris. How long on this road? 2 hours, maybe less. He's been moving slow. Slow means he's watching the road, Mason said, checking if he's being followed. Beaumont nodded. He'll come in careful. He looked at Mason directly. I could use someone who knows how this kind of approach works. Mason was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to go out to meet him, he said. I'm asking if you know this road, Beaumont said. The lay of it. Places a man might hold up and watch before he comes in. Mason thought about it. Ruby could see him thinking. Not the reluctant, should I, shouldn't I kind of thinking, but the tactical kind. North Draw, Mason said. I'd stop in the mesquite there and watch the cabin for 10 minutes before I committed. Get a count of who was visible, where the horses were, how many rifles I could see. How do you approach the mesquite without being seen from the cabin? Beaumont said. You don't come from the South Road, Mason said. You leave the South Road a mile out and cut through the wash on the east side, comes up behind the mesquite stand. Takes longer, but you arrive with cover. Beaumont was nodding. Can you show me? Mason, Ruby said. He looked at her. She wanted to say something and didn't know what exactly. Not, don't go, that wasn't it. She understood why he needed to go, and she understood that Beaumont asking him was a form of respect, not recruitment. It was the other thing she wanted to say, the thing that felt too large and too soon and too uncertain for a moment like this. She said, come back. He held her eyes. That's my plan, he said. He and Beaumont went out. Farron moved to the north window without being asked. Harris went back to the porch. Ruby sat at the table and tried to keep her hands busy and failed at it. She picked up the mending shirt she'd had all week and put it down, got up and checked on the girls, who were on the bed with the almanac, Lily asleep on top of it. Emma looked up. Is Mason gone? Emma said. He went to help a federal deputy, Ruby said. He'll be back. Emma looked at her for a moment. You like him, she said. Ruby paused. Yes, she said. I do. He likes you too, Emma said, the factual tone of a 9-year-old who had been watching adults and noting things. He watches you the same way he watches us, like he's checking that you're okay. Ruby didn't have an answer to that, or at least not one that seemed appropriate to give a 9-year-old at this particular moment. She pulled the almanac out from under Lily without waking her and put it on the shelf and went back to the main room. Farron was at the window. He hadn't moved. She's going to run, he said. Ruby looked at him. Collins, he said, when Pierce doesn't come back, or when he comes back wrong, she'll know it went bad. She'll run. She's done it before. He kept his eyes on the north draw. She'll have a route planned. She always has a route planned. Greer's watching her, Ruby said. Greer's watching his town, Farron said. That's different. She has resources he doesn't know about. Money put aside, horses probably stabled somewhere outside town. He paused. 3 years she's been doing this. She knows how to leave. Then we need Greer to move on her now, Ruby said. Not wait for Corwin. He needs reason, Farron said. Legally. He can't walk into a hotel room and detain a woman with guardianship papers, even fraudulent ones, without something more. Beaumont gave us something more, Ruby said. Farron turned and looked at her. She was already getting her coat. You're going to town, he said. I'm going to town, she said. I'll take Harris. Beaumont's letter of authority. Greer can act on that. And the ranch, Farron said. You and the girls, she said. Same as before. Same as before, he said. He turned back to the window. Go fast. She and Harris rode hard to town and arrived in 20 minutes with the horses blowing. Greer was in his office and he listened to what Ruby said and looked at the copy of Beaumont's letter she'd brought and looked at Harris and then stood up and got his hat without further discussion. Hotel's 3 blocks, he said. They went to the hotel. Martha Collins's room was on the 2nd floor at the end of the hall. Greer knocked once and said his name, and the woman who ran the hotel stood at the bottom of the stairs with her arms folded like she was bracing for the cost of whatever was about to happen to her wallpaper. No answer from the room. Greer knocked again. Silence. He tried the door. It opened. The room was empty. Bed made with the efficiency of someone who made it themselves, not left for the hotel woman. The wardrobe stood open, bare. The basin had been used and left wet. She was gone. Greer stood in the empty room for a moment with his hands at his sides. He made a sound that was almost a word and decided not to finish it. When? Ruby said to the hotel woman who had followed them up. I brought up her breakfast at 8, the woman said. She sounded aggrieved, like Martha Collins's departure was a personal affront to her hospitality. She ate it, gave me back the tray, said she'd be needing hot water later. That was the last I saw. Before Pierce left. She'd known before Pierce left that something had changed. Voss, Ruby said to Greer. She found out Voss was taken. How? Greer said. She has people, Ruby said. Farron said she always has people. She turned in the empty room. The window faced east. From this room on a clear morning you could see the beginning of the Cutter Road. She would have sent her own inquiry after wiring Voss. When the reply came back wrong, she knew. Greer was already at the window. East Road, he said. Farron said she'd have horses outside town, Ruby said. Greer turned around. His jaw was set in the way of a man who has made a decision and doesn't like it, but is going to follow through anyway. Harris, he said, get back to the ranch. Tell Farron and tell Beaumont, wherever Beaumont is, that Collins is running east. He looked at Ruby. You're with me. They went east. There were 2 of them on the east road for the first mile, and then Greer cut south off the road and through a dry wash that Ruby hadn't known was there, and they came up on the far side of a ridge and stopped. Below them, moving east at a controlled canter on a dark horse that was not the hotel's livery stock, was Martha Collins. She was riding well, not panicked, not fast enough to tire the horse, deliberate. She had a bag strapped behind the saddle, and she was wearing different clothes from the ones Ruby had seen her in. Trail clothes, functional, prepared. She'd had this departure planned for days. Probably the moment she'd arrived in Cutter's Junction, she'd set it up. Greer watched her for a moment. I can catch her, he said. I'll stay back, Ruby said. He went down the ridge at an angle, and Ruby held her position and watched. Greer's gray horse was fast on the flat, and he made up ground quickly, but Collins saw him coming and kicked her horse into a full run, and for a long minute it was simply a race, and Ruby could not tell how it would end. Then, from the east, from the direction Collins was running toward, 2 riders came over a rise in the road at a hard pace. Mason and Beaumont. They'd come around the east end of the wash, and now they were ahead of Collins on the road, and she saw them at the same moment Ruby did, and she pulled her horse up hard, the animal skidding in the dirt, and turned south, and ran directly into the side of the ridge where there was no path, and the terrain was broken, and her horse stopped and refused to go further. Greer caught up to her from the north, Mason and Beaumont from the east. Martha Collins sat on her dark horse in the broken ground at the base of the ridge, with 3 riders closing in and nowhere left to run. And what happened to her face was not what Ruby expected. It wasn't fear. It wasn't the cold rage she'd seen on the porch 2 days ago. It was something smaller and more human and more terrible. A look of pure, flat calculation, running through options and finding none, and then going still. Ruby rode down to meet them. She came up to the edge of the group and looked at Martha Collins from horseback. Collins looked back at her. The pleasant expression was gone, had been gone since the hotel room, and without it she looked older and harder and exactly like what she was. "You have a federal deputy," Beaumont was saying in the measured tone of official procedure, "and I am authorized by Marshal Corwin to detain you pending charges, including—" "I know what the charges are," Collins said. Her voice was even, controlled still, even now. "I've known they'd come eventually." She looked at Beaumont. "I want a lawyer." "You'll have one," Beaumont said, "as soon as we get to a town with one." Greer produced rope. Collins looked at it and then extended her hands in front of her with an almost dignified resignation, like she was doing Greer a small favor. Ruby watched Mason during all of this. He was sitting his horse at the edge of the group, a little apart, watching Collins the way he watched everything, steady and without expression. When Collins's hands were bound and Greer had her horse's reins, Mason looked away, looked at Ruby. He was dusty, and there was a cut on his cheekbone that hadn't been there this morning, small, dried, from something she'd hear the story of later. She looked at the cut, looked at him. He raised an eyebrow. She shook her head. Later. They rode back toward town. It took 2 more hours to settle things enough to breathe. Collins was lodged in Greer's jail, which was not equipped for long-term accommodation, but would hold until Beaumont could arrange transfer. Pierce had been found. Mason told it briefly on the ride back, not expanding on the details, at the entrance to the North Draw, exactly where Mason had predicted. He'd given up his gun when Beaumont identified himself and was currently tied to a fence post outside the jail, waiting for Greer's attention. Beaumont was efficient with paperwork in the way of a man who had done this before. He sat in Greer's office for an hour writing things and having Chet Purdy and Farron and Ruby each attest to their accounts in front of a witness. And he wrote it all down with the focused competence of someone who knew what a case needed to hold in front of a federal court. Farron sat across from Ruby at the table in Greer's office after he'd given his account and rubbed his eyes and said, 3 years. "It's done," Ruby said. "Voss," he said. "Collins. That's the core of it." He put his hands flat on the table. "The other cases? Corwin's going to have to go back through them, find where the children went. That's—" He stopped. "That's not finished." "No," Ruby said. "But it started." He looked at her. Something in his face, not quite relief, not quite grief, something that lived between them. "You're a practical woman," he said. "I've had to be," she said. "It's a good thing to be," he said. "In this." After the paperwork, after Beaumont had what he needed and Greer had Pierce behind a door and Collins in the other cell, and both of them quiet, Ruby found Mason outside the jail, leaning against the building with his hat pushed back and his eyes closed and his face turned up toward the late afternoon light. She stood beside him. "Pierce," she said. "He went for his gun," Mason said, eyes still closed. He stopped when Beaumont identified himself. Before that, a pause. It was close for a minute. "The cut on your face." "Branch," he said, moving fast through the draw, not Pierce. She looked at the cut. It was shallow, not serious, and she'd cleaned worse on herself and not thought twice about it. "I need to get back to the girls," she said. "I know," he said. He opened his eyes, looked at her in the late afternoon light. "Ruby." She waited. "I have to tell you something," he said, about Tucson, about the job." He straightened up from the wall and turned to face her. "The man's name is Garrett Ewell. He runs a spread south of the city. He wrote me a good letter, and the work was real, and the pay was fair, and I had a plan built around it." "I know," she said. "I wrote to him," Mason said, 2 days ago, before Beaumont came." He paused. "I told him the situation had changed, and I wouldn't be taking the position." Ruby looked at him. "I couldn't leave," he said. "I told myself it was because of the girls, because I couldn't take them into this, and leaving them here wasn't, but that was only part of it." He looked at her directly. "You know what the rest of it was?" She did know. She'd known since the second morning, maybe the first, in the way you knew things that you didn't examine directly, because examining them felt presumptuous. You wrote to him before we knew how this would end, she said. Yes, before Beaumont came. Yes. So you'd already decided to stay, whatever happened. Yes, he said. The simplest word, said the plainest way, and it landed harder than something more elaborate would have. Ruby looked at the street, the town going about its late afternoon, people moving on the sidewalks, a wagon pulling past, the ordinary world running on its ordinary tracks. I can't pay much, she said. The ranch turns a working profit, but it's not generous. He was quiet for a beat. That's not what I know it's not, she said. I'm being practical. She looked at him. I need a hand who knows what he's doing and doesn't mind hard work and will be there in the morning. I've got the room in the barn loft. It's cold in winter, but it's dry. He looked at her. The girls need to be somewhere stable, she said. If you're here, they're here. I'm not ready to call it more than that yet, but that's what it is right now. The barn loft, he said. For now, she said, until we know what we're doing. A beat of silence. I can fix the north window in the loft, he said. It rattles in the wind. I know it rattles, she said. I've been meaning to do it. I'll do it tomorrow, he said. They stood side by side on the street outside the jail in the late afternoon light and didn't say anything else, which was something she had also come to understand about him. That he knew when words had done what they could do and something else needed to take over, which was simply being present in the same place without requiring the presence to be narrated. The sun was going low. The shadows were long on the street. Let's go home, Ruby said, and they went. They got back to the ranch as the last light was leaving the sky, that narrow window between sunset and dark when everything went orange and flat and the shadows disappeared into a general dimness. Ruby's mare was tired and didn't pretend otherwise. Mason's horse walked with its head low. They came up the drive in silence, and Farron was on the porch, and he looked at their faces, and then at the absence of anything terrible, and he sat back down in his chair and let out a breath that had probably been held since they left. Done, Ruby said. Collins, he said. Greer's jail tonight. Beaumont transfers her tomorrow. Farron put his hands on his knees and looked at the yard. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. 3 years of following a name through territories and dead ends and sheriffs who wouldn't listen and children he couldn't find in time, and it ended on a porch in Arizona at dusk with 2 tired riders coming home. It wasn't the ending anyone would have written if they'd had a choice. It was just the one that had arrived. The cabin door opened and Lily came out at speed and went directly to Mason, who had barely gotten off his horse, and wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face into his side. He stood there for a second like a man who had been caught off balance and wasn't sure of his footing. Then he put his hand on the back of her head and held it there. I knew you'd come back, Lily said into his shirt. I told you I would, he said. You didn't actually say that, Emma said from the doorway. She was leaning on the frame with her arms folded, 9 years old and entirely unwilling to let sentiment go unchecked. You said that was your plan. Plans worked out, Mason said. This time, Emma said, but she came down the steps and stood near him in the way she had of being close without making a display of it, and that was Emma's version of a hug, and everyone who knew her understood it. Ruby watched all of this from beside her horse and felt something in her chest that she did not try to name because naming it felt like rushing it, and she had learned, slowly and at some cost, that the things worth having were worth not rushing. Mom. Farron left 2 days later. He'd stayed long enough to give Beaumont everything he had in writing, all the documentation, the names, the dates, the accounts of other cases, and Beaumont had taken it with the focused efficiency of a man who knew what a federal case needed and was grateful for the work that had been done before he arrived. He told Farron, before he left with Collins in custody, and Pierce behind him in a written record that would go to Corwin's office in Yuma, that the documentation Farron had built over 3 years was going to be the backbone of whatever came next. Farron had received this without apparent satisfaction. Ruby noticed that. The look on his face when Beaumont told him his work mattered. Not relief, not pride, something more complicated. The expression of someone who was thinking about the 11 children he'd confirmed, and the number he hadn't confirmed, and what backbone meant to the ones who were already gone from where they'd started. On the morning he left, he drank coffee at Ruby's table one last time and talked for a while with Emma about the almanac, which she'd apparently been reading with genuine interest and had questions about the sections on weather patterns in the Southwestern Territories. Farron answered all of them with the same seriousness he always brought to her questions, and Ruby watched Emma's face open up in the particular way it did when an adult treated her intelligence as a thing to be engaged rather than managed. Lily gave him a drawing she'd made. It was of the mule from his story, recognizable only if you knew what it was meant to be, but she'd drawn it mid-kick, which was the detail that mattered, and Farron folded it carefully and put it in his breast pocket. "You're a fine artist," he told her. "It looks like a potato," Lily said. "A potato in motion," Farron said. "That's harder than a still potato." Lily considered this and decided it was a compliment. At the gate, Farron shook Mason's hand and held it for a moment. "I'll send word when the case moves," he said. "And if Corwin finds... if the other children..." "Send word either way," Mason said. "Good news or bad?" Farron nodded. He looked at Ruby. "You did something here that most people wouldn't have done," he said. "On the night of the storm, opening that door." "I almost didn't," Ruby said. "Most people don't," he said. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? Most people almost don't, and then they don't." He put his hat on. "You almost didn't, and then you did. That's the whole difference." He rode out. Ruby watched him go until he turned onto the main road and disappeared behind the tree line. Then she went back to the fence she'd been mending before he came to say goodbye, because the fence didn't care about the weight of the moment and needed doing regardless. Marshal Corwin arrived 6 days after Beaumont left, which was faster than anyone had expected. He rode in on a big sorrel horse with 2 deputies behind him and the look of a man who had been in the saddle for a long time and had made his peace with it. He was older than Ruby had imagined, late 50s maybe, with a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that were pale and steady and took in everything without appearing to. He sat at Ruby's table and went through everything again, not because he doubted what Beaumont had gathered, but because that was how he worked, going back to the sources directly and checking the account against itself. He talked to Ruby, to Mason, to the girls. He talked to Emma for 40 minutes with the door open and Ruby in the room, and Emma answered his questions with the same clear directness she brought to everything. And when he was done, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. "You're a remarkable young woman," he said to Emma. "You know that?" Emma looked at him with the level gaze she gave everyone. "I know I survived," she said. "I'm not sure that's the same thing." Corwin looked at her for a beat. "No," he said, "it's not, but it's the start of it." He looked at Lily, who was next to Mason on the bench, leaning against his arm, with the casual ownership of a child who has decided where she belongs. "Both of you survived," he said, "and you did it smart." Lily looked pleased. Emma looked like she was considering whether pleased was warranted and decided it possibly was. After the girls went out, Corwin told them what the federal case looked like. Collins was being transferred to a federal facility. Voss had already begun cooperating. The way men cooperated when they understood that cooperation was the only remaining currency they had. And what he was giving Corwin's office was significant. Names, routes, buyers, a network that had been running for 6 years and spanned 3 territories. "It's bigger than we thought," Corwin said. He said it without satisfaction, which means more cases to go back through, more children to try to locate. He looked at his hands. "Not all of them are going to be findable. I want you to know that before you hear it from someone else." The table was quiet. "How many?" Mason said. "We think 43, Corwin said. "Possibly more. Voss's records go back further than Collins's operation. Some of the early ones." He stopped. "We'll find what we can find." 43. The number sat in the room and nobody tried to move it. "The 11 Farron documented," Ruby said. "We've confirmed placement on 7 of them," Corwin said. "Working on the rest." He paused. "The 2 boys from Tucson are with a decent family while we trace their people. We found an uncle in New Mexico. He's coming." That was something. Against 43, it was not enough, but it was something, and Ruby had learned in the last week that something was what you worked with when enough wasn't available. Corwin left the next morning. He shook everyone's hand, including the girls, and when he shook Lily's hand, she shook back with great formality and told him she hoped his horse was comfortable on the long ride, and he said that was a thoughtful thing to wonder about, and thank you for mentioning it. After his horses had gone down the road, Lily stood on the porch and said, "He was nice, for a very serious man." "Most serious men are nice," Mason said. "They're just busy." "You're serious," Lily said, "and you're nice." "Sometimes," he said. "Most of the time," she said, with the firmness of personal experience. The question of the girls' future, where they would live, what their legal status would be, who would speak for them in the official sense, was one that Ruby had been turning over since the night on the porch when Lily had asked if Mason could stay. It was a practical question wearing an emotional costume, or maybe an emotional question wearing practical clothes. Either way, it needed an answer that wasn't just hoping. She brought it up to Mason the week after Corwin left, on an evening when the girls were inside and the light was going long and gold across the yard and they were sitting on the porch steps without any particular purpose. "Greer mentioned a family court contact in Flagstaff," she said, "someone who handles placement for children in the territory without people." "I talked to him," Mason said. She looked at him. "When?" "Day before yesterday, when I went to town for the lumber." He'd been to town for lumber, she'd known that. She hadn't known about the other stop. "I wanted to understand what it looked like. Formally." "And?" He was quiet for a moment. "Formal placement requires a fixed address," he said, "and a stable income, and someone the court considers a fit guardian." He paused. "They don't typically place children with men in my situation. No property, no family record, no—" "But they do place children with women who own land," Ruby said. He looked at her. "I'm not suggesting anything that either of us isn't ready for," she said carefully. "I'm talking about what's possible, legally, if we wanted to go that route." "Ruby," he said. "I know," she said. "It's fast. It's been 12 days since a storm washed you onto my porch. I know." "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "That's not what I was going to say." "What were you going to say?" He thought about it for what felt like a long time. "I was going to say that I've been here 12 days, and I've fixed more things on this ranch than I've fixed anywhere in 10 years, he said. "And that every morning I wake up, and I know what the day is going to ask of me, and that's not a thing I've had in a long time." He looked at the yard. "And I was going to say that I know I'm not what most people would have drawn up if they were planning a future. No land, no name, anyone knows, no people. And I know that what I look like to a territory court is—" "I don't care what you look like to a territory court," Ruby said. "I care what you are." He was quiet. "What I'm proposing," she said, and her voice was steady, even though something underneath it was not entirely, "is that we talk to the court about me applying for guardianship, with you as a permanent worker on the property, which you are, which we've established." She looked at him. "The girls need a legal home. That's the priority. The rest of it, between you and me, we can be slow about. We can be careful. I'm not asking you to—" "Ruby," he said. Quiet. The way he said her name when he wanted her to stop talking so he could say something. She stopped. "I built something in my head about Tucson," he said, "when I was on the road with the girls. A plan where I got them somewhere safe and worked and saved and found someone to take them in. And I did my part, and then—" He paused. "And then I didn't know. I couldn't see past the part where they were safe. There wasn't anything after that in the picture." "And now," she said. He looked at the fence line, at the barn door he'd repaired, at the porch rail he'd reset last week because it had worked loose from the post. "Now I can see past it," he said. "That's new." Ruby looked at her hands. "The court contact in Flagstaff," she said. "Greer says he's fair-minded. Not everybody's fair-minded, but this one is." "I know," Mason said. "He told me the same thing." Another pause. "He also told me, the contact, that they've placed children with women who had male workers on the property before. That it's not, that it's been done." "So you were already thinking about it," she said, the corner of his mouth. I was already thinking about it. Before I brought it up. Before you brought it up. She looked at him sideways and he was looking at her sideways, and it was almost funny. Two people who had been thinking the same thing and circling it from opposite sides. 12 days, she said. I know, he said. That's fast, she said. I know. But, she said. But, he agreed. Neither of them finished the sentence, which was fine. Some sentences were better as gestures than completions. The application went to the Flagstaff family court 3 weeks later. Ruby had filed the paperwork herself, with Greer as a witness, and a letter from Beaumont attesting to the circumstances of the case. Mason had given a written account, his own, in his own words, in handwriting that was careful and deliberate, and not the handwriting of someone who wrote often, but someone who wrote with intention when he did. The contact in Flagstaff, a man named Aldrich, who had the flat, tired patience of someone who had seen every variety of human situation and had decided to treat each one as the specific thing it was, wrote back within 2 weeks. There would be a visit. Someone from the court would come to the ranch. They would speak with the girls privately. They would observe the home. The day of the visit, Lily wore her best dress and had let Emma do her hair without complaint, which was unprecedented. Emma wore her own best dress and had the almanac on the table in front of her, open to the weather charts, because she'd decided it conveyed stability and intelligence, and she was not wrong about that. Mason had repainted the porch steps that week. He hadn't mentioned it. He'd just done it. The court's representative was a woman named Mrs. Doyle, mid-40s, with a notebook and a practical manner and sharp eyes that she made look casual. She spent an hour at the ranch. She spoke to the girls in the back room with the door almost closed, and Ruby and Mason on the porch, not pretending they weren't listening. From inside, they heard Emma's clear voice explaining the layout of the ranch, and which chores were hers, and which were Lily's, and how Mason had taught Lily to recognize which fence post needed resetting after rain. They heard Lily explain that she was in charge of stirring things, and that she was good at it. They heard Mrs. Doyle ask, "Do you feel safe here?" A brief silence. Then Lily's voice. "This is the safest place I've ever been, and I've thought about it a lot." On the porch, Mason was looking at the new paint on the steps. Ruby did not look at him, because if she looked at him, she was going to need a moment, and this was not the moment. Mrs. Doyle came out after an hour and wrote things in her notebook and asked Ruby several questions about the property and income and arrangements and future plans, all of which Ruby answered directly and without embellishment. She asked Mason about his work on the ranch and his intentions, and Mason answered in the same way he answered everything, simply and without performance. Mrs. Doyle wrote more things down. "I'll make my report to Aldrich," she said. "The process takes 6 to 8 weeks from submission." She looked at both of them. "I'll tell you what I tell everyone, which is that I can't predict outcomes. What I can tell you is that I've done a lot of these visits, and I know what I'm looking for." She didn't say what she'd found. She shook their hands and got in the buggy the town had sent for her and drove back toward Cutter's Junction. And when she was gone, Lily appeared at the door and said, "Did we do well?" "You were perfect," Ruby said. "Emma told me not to mention the mule story," Lily said. "She said it was irrelevant. I didn't mention it." "Good call," Mason said. "I wanted to," Lily said. "I know," he said, "but Emma was right." Lily accepted this with the grace of someone who had learned that Emma was often right, even when it was inconvenient. 6 weeks after the visit, a letter came from the Flagstaff family court. Ruby was at the fence line when Mason brought it out to her. She could tell from the way he was holding it that he hadn't opened it, that he'd waited for her, because it wasn't his letter to open first. She took it, looked at the seal, looked at him. "Open it," he said. She did. She read it once, then again. Then she put it down at her side and looked at the fence line and the sky behind it, and the far ridge where the hawk had been circling that morning she and Mason had stood in the yard talking about sight lines and approaches and all the ways something dangerous could arrive. "Well," Mason said. She handed him the letter. He read it. His face didn't do the thing she'd half expected, the obvious, visible relief. It did the other thing, the smaller thing, The slight shift around the eyes of someone receiving news they had wanted badly and are now having to adjust to the reality of having it. Provisional, he said. 6 months. Standard, she said. Aldrich explained that. 6 months, then full guardianship, if nothing changes. Nothing's going to change, he said. No, she said. It's not. She took the letter back from him and folded it and put it in her coat pocket against her chest and went back to the fence, because the fence still needed doing, and good news didn't change that. But she was smiling while she did it. She couldn't entirely stop, so she stopped trying. She told the girls at supper. She had thought about how to say it, and had decided the best way was the direct way, which was usually the best way for anything. The court wrote back, she said, about making your home here official. They said yes. Lily looked at her, then at Mason, then back at Ruby. Official like permanent, she said. Official like permanent, Ruby said. Lily's face went through several things rapidly. Disbelief, then something working to catch up to the disbelief, then something that broke through all of it that was just pure and uncomplicated. She burst into tears. Not sad tears. The other kind. The ones that come when something you wanted so badly you stopped letting yourself want it arrives anyway. And the gap between what you'd stopped hoping for and what just happened is too large for anything else to fill it. Emma put her arm around Lily and didn't say anything. Emma's face was doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she hadn't decided to express yet, a kind of held breath behind her eyes. Ruby did not look at Mason, because if she looked at Mason right now, she was going to be in the same condition as Lily, and one of them needed to hold the room together. Okay, Emma said, finally, to her sister. Okay, Lily, come on. She rubbed Lily's back, the practical gesture of a girl who had been holding her sister together for a year and a half and was not going to stop now just because things had gotten better. After a minute, Lily sniffed and wiped her face with the back of her hand and straightened up with the deliberateness of someone who had decided they were done crying and meant it. Does this mean we go to school in town? She said. There's a school, Ruby said. 2 days a week. Does it mean we get to stay in the room with the yellow blanket? Lily said. It's your room now, Ruby said. Lily absorbed this. What about Emma? Emma gets the room too, Ruby said. It's both your room. Emma looked at Ruby across the table, that measuring, serious look. Thank you, Emma said. She said it the way she said most things. Straight, no flourish, the words doing exactly the work they needed to, and nothing extra. Don't thank me yet, Ruby said. There are chores. I know about chores, Emma said. There'll be more of them, Ruby said. That's all right, Emma said. We're good at chores. The months after that were not simple or easy. Nothing about 4 people building a household out of pieces that hadn't been made for each other was simple or easy. There were hard weeks and miscommunications and days when the weight of what everyone had been through before arriving here pressed down in ways that were hard to explain or name. Lily had nightmares through the winter. Not every night, but enough that Mason started leaving a lamp low in the hall, which helped without anyone having to say why. Emma had periods of withdrawal where she went very quiet for days and answered questions minimally and worked her chores with a focused intensity that Ruby recognized as armor and left alone until it loosened on its own. Mason had his own version of it. There were mornings he was gone before first light, and Ruby found him at the far fence or the barn, just moving, just needing space that wasn't the cabin. She learned not to ask. She learned that the right response was coffee waiting when he came back in, and leaving it at that. And he seemed to understand what the coffee meant in the same way she'd understood what the lamp in the hall meant. Ruby was not without her own difficulty. There were times when old anger surfaced unexpectedly, not at anyone in the cabin, but the Thomas kind, the wasted years kind, the should-have-known kind that didn't actually help anything but arrived anyway. She worked through it in the garden mostly, which was cheaper than most ways of working through things and had the added benefit of producing food. But there were also ordinary days, regular, unremarkable days that accumulated into something solid. Lily learning to ride on a patient old gelding Ruby bought from a rancher south of town, and the look on her face when the horse responded to her weight the first time, that startled, delighted look of discovering a competence. Emma reading everything in the house and demanding more, which led to a standing arrangement with the school teacher in town who had a collection of books and was glad to loan them to a child who would return them, read and not damaged. Mason teaching Emma to whittle, which she was methodically determined about in the way she was methodical about everything, though her results for the first month looked, as Lily observed helpfully, like potatoes at various stages of distress. And Mason and Ruby building the thing between them slowly and without rushing it, because they had both learned the cost of rushing. Not dramatic gestures or declarations, nothing that looked like the performances they'd both seen fail. Just the daily choosing of each other. The conversation at the end of the day. The division of work that settled into pattern without being assigned. The particular silence of two people in the same room who are comfortable in the same silence. He fixed the north window in the barn loft in the first week, as promised. He was out of the loft and into the cabin's second room, the room Ruby had kept empty since Thomas left, by November, which happened without announcement and without a ceremony. Just the gradual migration of his few things from one building to another until one morning the loft was empty and the second room was not. Ruby noticed the morning it was complete and didn't say anything. She made coffee and handed him a cup. He took it. That was enough. The full guardianship papers came in the spring, when the mesquite was coming into leaf and the mornings were warm enough to sit on the porch without a coat. Ruby signed them at Greer's office with Mason beside her and the girls waiting outside, Lily attempting to balance on the porch rail and Emma telling her not to. When they came out, Lily demanded to see the papers. "You can't read legal documents," Emma said. "I can read the names on them," Lily said. Ruby handed them over. Lily looked at the paper with the focused attention she brought to important things and found her name on it, and Emma's name, and Ruby's name, and then she looked up. "Mason's name isn't on it," she said. She said it directly, without accusation, because Lily was not an accusing child. She said it the way she said most things, as an observation that she wanted someone to account for. Ruby looked at Mason. Mason looked at Lily. "Not yet," he said. Lily studied him. "Okay," she said, and handed the papers back. "Is there food? I'm hungry." "There's always food," Emma said, with the weariness of someone who had been answering this question for years. "I'm still hungry," Lily said. They walked back to the wagon, all four of them in the spring morning, and the thing that Mason had said, "Not yet," stayed with Ruby the whole ride home, the two words carrying the weight of an intention without making it a demand, giving it time, leaving room. She drove and he sat beside her and the girls were in the back, and Lily was telling Emma about the bird she'd seen on the post outside Greer's office, and Emma was explaining what kind of bird it was because she'd looked it up in the almanac, and the road went through mesquite in pale new leaf, and the sky was that particular blue that only happened in spring and only lasted for a few weeks before the heat bleached it out. This was the thing, Ruby thought, not the dramatic moments, not the storm, not Pierce in the draw, not Collins on the ridge. Those had happened and mattered, and she would carry them. But this was the thing that was actually built from them. 4 people on a road, the ordinary weight of a morning, a child explaining birds to her sister, the particular quality of spring light in the Arizona territory when you have something to look at it with. She had spent 2 years on that ranch defining herself by what she'd survived and who she was without the things she'd lost. She'd been right to do it. She'd needed to know she could stand on her own ground and hold it. You couldn't skip that. You couldn't build something real on a foundation of need or loneliness or the simple wish not to be alone anymore. She knew that now in the way you knew things that cost you something to learn. But you also couldn't live permanently in the mode of surviving. At some point, if you were fortunate and careful and occasionally willing to open a door during a bad storm, surviving became something else, became the ground under you instead of the thing you were doing with every breath. She didn't have a word for what it became after that. She suspected the word wasn't the point. The ranch came into view around the last bend, the cabin, the barn, the straight fence post, the new porch rail, and Lily leaned forward from the back and said, "Home," in the casual way people named things that had stopped being remarkable because they were simply true. Ruby looked at it. The place she'd held on to through 2 years of hard going, the place she'd decided was worth the cost of keeping, the place she'd opened a door in during a storm because a man had asked for nothing for himself, and she'd recognized something in that asking she hadn't seen in a long time. Yes, she said. Home. Mason said nothing. He put his hand over hers on the reins briefly, the way a man touched something he was glad to be near. Then he took it back and they drove in. The hawk was on the fence post by the gate, the same one that had been circling the mesquite that morning weeks ago when they'd stood in the yard talking about how danger arrived. It looked at them with the flat, assessing attention of a creature that had no particular interest in human business, but was willing to observe it. Then it opened its wings and lifted and was gone over the ridge in 3 strokes. Ruby stopped the wagon, got down, opened the gate. They went in.